maximum picture quality, it may be necessary to adjust the tracking control on your VCR.
This, it was given me to know, that many movies have been made that try and emulate what Lucas brought to our world. And this too was given to me to know, that a movie shall be made that will combine the fantasy of Excalibur and the sci-fi of this Star War, and in the smoke of the burning wreck, it shall blacken the sky with tales of a glaive that will be sure to fill the pockets of men with gold. But one thing I cannot know, how did they get this all so wrong? This is Adjust Your Tracking, a podcast where we're on an adventure to watch a century cinema decade by decade, year by year. I am one half of your hosts, Liam Delaney, and with me is...
Hello, I'm Oliver the Magnificent, short in stature, tall in power, narrow by purpose and wide in vision. And I do not podcast well with peasants and beggars. Goodbye!
I can't believe you had a bit set up.
Motherfucker stole my intro.
That's on my notes, yeah. On my envelope notes.
Good lad. Good lad.
I can't believe you had a bit. Like, this is a whole new world.
Do you know what? They may be written on the back of an envelope. but it came correct.
Who's that sexy voice?
Hello, my name's Paul. I've been here a couple of times before, and now I'm back because as hard as I try, I can't stop loving these two.
Well, we clearly met you along the way and on a venture through swamps and whatever things were in this film.
All right, if you're in this film, which character would you be?
Cyclops, 100%.
The Cyclops, Liam?
I've no idea. I'd probably be like the changeling. I'd be the changeling that
nice.
goes and turns into like a black goo.
I would be... Who would I be?
Well, clearly you're Norgo the Magnificent, or whatever his name is. His name is
That's a
Norgo,
good point.
What is that character's name?
Ergo, is it?
Ergo. Yeah, I'm
Ergo.
jumping in with that one because the chances of me remembering the name of any cast or characters is like nothing, as usual. So
I thought, watching this whole film, I thought the main character was called Krull. I didn't realise the planet was Krull.
I wrote him down in my notes as Cobwin the whole time.
Just Cobwin.
Cobwin.
Anyway, Paul, how you doing?
I'm alright, yeah. I'm doing good, feeling strong. That's a total lie. My little Babby's started nursery recently, and she's just like, every time she goes, it's like a new tropical disease just lands on the house. So just always like this like background of general sickness. So, but yeah,
I like how you say Babby. You can't take the boy out of Birmingham. Well, you can take the Birmingham out of the boy. Hang on, no, you can't take the boy out of Birmingham. I don't know. Fuck that.
Do you know what?
This is going so
I've
well.
got to do it because like everyone down here assumes I'm from London, so I've got to play up to it, you know.
Down from London way.
How you doing, Liam?
I just had my last cup of tea for 24 hours.
Oh no.
I'm on doctor's orders not to have anything else. So I had a cup of tea to celebrate. That's not celebration, that's the wrong word. To commiserate. And now I'm on water. I've got my water here.
Is it like you can only have water up until midnight or 6 o'clock in the morning or something?
No, for 24 hours. So
It's water. You can't have water for 24 hours.
No, I can only have water. I can only have water and other clear liquids. I think I can have mint tea. I think they allow me mint tea. That's
kind of them.
That's kind of them. And so, and because they put this restriction on me, I'm already feeling hungry. And I ate like an hour ago, and I'm already like, I wish I had something to eat. I could eat. I want something to eat. So I think I'm
just gorged. Just had a complete banquet. That's what you should have done.
Some very strict instructions for a light lunch. So I only had a light lunch.
Well, you know what, Liam? You're in luck because we're about to gorge ourselves on conversation about a cult sci-fi fantasy classic.
Medieval high fiction magic stuff.
Sure.
That's what we're watching.
With swinging from chandeliers.
Ah, yeah, swashbuckling sci-fi.
Yeah, so what have you all been watching this past few weeks anyway? Anything good?
Oh, why didn't you go first, Ollie? You've got a special one lined up.
So, Paul, if you don't know, I've got a backlog of Blu-rays and DVDs that I haven't watched, so I've like listed them all on a big document, all numbered. And the idea now is every week, Liam or the guest picks a number, and then I watch that film for the following week. So last week, Liam picked the amazing 300 Rise of an Empire.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I actually, the only reason why I bought this was because it was £1 in the pound store, and I was going there to buy my weekly Twin Peaks. And if you know what a Twin Peaks is, it's basically like a cheap Toblerone, but it's really good. Anyway, it's probably more interesting than the film. And when I went to log this film to say that I'd watched it, apparently I've already seen it, and I have.
Oh, well done.
I have no memory of this film whatsoever. And I guarantee probably in a couple of years' time I'll have no memory of this viewing. But
well, that was successful then.
So it's been a long time since I saw the first 300, probably at the cinema when it came out, so 14 years ago. This one is basically like a prequel set at the same time and a sequel all at the same time. A lot more of it set at sea though. And so it's about the Persians versus the Greeks and obviously Xerxes. And it says it's based on the comic book Xerxes, which actually at the time the film was released, the comic book didn't come out for a following 4 years afterwards. So I don't know, work that out for yourself.
It's time loop.
I don't know how that works out.
I guess that's like the final Scott Pilgrim book and film,
Yeah, I guess so, kind of.
because that didn't come out till afterwards.
Yeah. But yeah, it's not a very good film. I mean, it looks okay, and it's kind of got that typical. I know Zack Snyder didn't direct it, but it's pretty. He may as well have. I mean, he wrote the story and produced the film as well. It looks like a music video / video game, a very good video game cutscene. The whole film, pretty much. It's all shot on green screen, so everything's like, CG rendered backgrounds and whatever. The main actor is the most Australian actor in the world. So even when he tries to disguise his Australian accent with like a thick British accent, he still sounds like, "G'day, mate." And it's just like, oh God, couldn't take it seriously. But then again, you had Gerard Butler, who was the most Scottish Greek ever, like in 300.
That's true.
Yeah, Eva Green's in it. I quite like Eva Green. She's got a weird cadence to her voice now and again, but she plays like the sexy femme fatale really well. She's got that down to a T.
Doesn't she also play that in the Sim City sequel this year? The same year she plays that in the.
Is she in
Sim
that one
City
as well?
Sequel. Yeah. So she
Did you
got
say
both
Sim
the
City
green
or
screen
Sin City?
movies. Sin City. There should be a Sim City film. That'd be great. Rise of the Tower.
Don't say it too loud. They'll do it. They're scraping the barrel.
The problem with these films is they put all their effort into how it looks, how it sounds. It sounds great. The look, it's all nice and crisp, and it's all well animated and stuff like that. But there's no care in the acting. It's all like it's so I don't know. It's just very weak sauce on that front. And 2 out of 5. That's what I'm giving it, and I think that's being generous.
I just love the concept of like taking a Zack Snyder thing, having him work on the sequel, doing everything except the one thing that he is actually good at.
He's good at, yeah.
Which is like creating these like very visually impressive set pieces, that work really well at selling action. And it's like, right, Zack, here's the concept.
It wasn't the story that I go into Zack Snyder films for.
Yeah.
Apparently he wants to do a sequel that was about Alexander the Great, and it was going to be called 300 Blood and Ashes, but Warner Brothers were like, nope. And then he had an idea that he could like use the same style, but on other like historical things. So like the American Revolutionary War and the Battle of the Alamo. And
oh my God, I'm so glad that didn't happen.
Yeah,
that sounds rotten.
That sounds so horrible.
That sounds so bad.
Because he's had 2 films released this year, quite like in quick succession of each other. He's been in like the news quite a lot, And there's so many articles keep popping up, and it's doing my head in, going, Zack Snyder wants to make this, Zack Snyder wants to do this. And I'm just like, oh, God, just go away now, go away.
Zack Snyder wants to be in the news, so he said something about some property with strong search engine optimization in the Google rankings. That's what normally happens. That's what every single one of these articles is. Yes, hello.
Okay, give me a number between 1 and 171.
69, dudes.
I knew that was coming.
Honestly,
that took too many episodes for someone to do.
Do you know what? I've never seen this film. Well, obviously, I've never seen this film. It's Godfather Part 3. Yeah, no. Godfather Part 3.
I've got this list of films I haven't watched, and do you know what? Godfather Part 3, though, you haven't watched. I mean, to be honest, I was I guess you've definitely... There's no chance that you haven't seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Oh, I've seen that.
But that was the reference. Together? That was the reference I was making.
I got the reference.
So, are you watching the original cut of 3? Or are we going to watch the new cut of 3? Which one is it?
Is the new cut readily available?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking you.
Well, I mean, the version I've got is the Blu-ray, which I'm assuming is the original. I'll have a look to see if said recut is available. I know it's got a weird subtitle
because it came out last year. The recut, so I don't know where it's available, but it came out last year. Yeah.
I love that this segment has a cliffhanger ending. That's really you've you've worked that really well. Tune in next week to find out if it's the regular version or the whatever new version is.
Yeah, the new version is called The Godfather Coda: The Death of Michael Corleone.
I think I'll find it's called Mario Puzo's The Godfather Coda: The Death of Michael Corleone. What name is that?
Wow,
that is very wow. Anyway, so we'll find out next week if Ollie hated Sofia Coppola or not, because that's all anyone ever says about in that film. I don't think 3 is as bad as people say it is, but
no.
Who am I to judge?
Okay.
It's hard to stick the landing, you know?
It's hard to stick the landing. No one can make good trilogies.
The first 2 set a high bar. I can't imagine it topping those 2, so...
I think it's fine. I think with some distance from it, it's fine. It's not just, it's, when it came out at the time, people wanted it to be, the best film ever made. And it's not.
True.
I think it's more that. It's not like it's the last Star Wars film or the recent trilogies.
I think it was only made because he needed the money, didn't he? I think he was losing money on like something, as in...
probably. He's probably doing some passion
Francis
projects.
Ford Coppola, yeah.
Yeah, that's normally how he worked.
So what have you been watching?
Well, I've watched a ton of new films, so I'm not going to talk about too much about them because I don't want to spoil them. But you mentioned Mr. Zack earlier, so I watched Army of the Dead this week. And it's
the pixel
fine.
Cut. Dead pixel cut.
The pixel cut, yeah, dead pixel cut, yeah. Which you can totally notice, which I thought was quite fun. That's the first major motion picture to release with dead pixels. Well done.
Are they really noticeable?
Well, yeah. If you know what you're looking for, I guess, I don't know. If you're looking at the screen and not your phone, and this film was definitely designed to look at your phone, so maybe that's why they didn't care. That might be their trick.
I've only seen the trailer for it, and it looks like it just uses that shallow depth of field that the end of Justice League has, where everything is just completely blown out, except for like what's in the
It's hilarious. The depth of field's so funny in this that they literally just look like... I don't know, like it looks like it's meant to be 3D or something, because you just see them in perfect kind of like crisp focus, and in the background is so blurry and so fogged out that they could be anywhere. They could be on any set, any location. And most of the film shot like that. It's baffling, frankly. But it made it very easy for them to insert Tig Notaro into the film, because she wasn't, I don't know if you know that about her, but the person who originally played that role in the film had some issues and they had to cut them out of the film, so they reshot the film with Tig Notaro, but they just shot Tig on her own and just dropped her into every scene that she needs to be in. So I think that depth of field made it quite easy for them to do.
Does it look quite good though? Does it if you didn't know about that, would you kind of
I don't know. It's hard for me to say it's hard for me to say. It's very noticeable that sometimes she's on a green screen and not with the rest of them. It's just, I think it's hard to disguise that.
There's a meme going around saying Warner Brothers couldn't remove a mustache, but Zack Snyder removed a whole actor and replaced it with another actor. So something.
And it's good though. I fucking adore Tig. I think she's fucking wonderful, and I think she's absolutely brilliant in this film. She might be the best thing about the film, and I can't believe, like, you know, it's like a Christopher Plummer effect. Like,
Oh yeah.
maybe sometimes those last decisions are the best, but it's fine. I was kind of looking through my Zack Snyder rankings actually the other day, Letterboxd, and it might be my highest ranked Zack Snyder film. So there's that.
Yeah.
That's a review. I only gave it 3 stars, but it still might be my highest ranked Zack Snyder.
Well, 3 stars is average, isn't it? That's okay.
Yeah, it's a good film. I enjoyed it. I legitimately enjoyed it, but it is what it is. And I also watched Cruella, talking in new films. I gave that 2.5 stars. That's fine.
Okay.
It's
I've
kind
been
of
seeing
enjoyable.
memes about this, that there's an origin for why she becomes Cruella, and it seems like a joke. Is it true?
I will have to say spoiler warnings for this section. The meme that's going around is that Dalmatians killed her mom, and that's why she hates Dalmatians, right?
That's what I'm saying.
In the film, Dalmatians do kill her mom. However, she doesn't hate dogs because of it. That is actually wrong. She actually
Right.
and explicitly that is in the film, that she actually loves dogs and she has dogs. She doesn't like hate Dalmatians like Batman hates crime or something like that. That isn't what happens. But Dalmatians do kill her mom.
Like if Batman,
That is definitely it.
if Batman's cape was made of the skin of criminals. Which they would do if Warner Brothers weren't such cowards.
Well-
Zack Snyder would do it if you gave him an extra 300 million.
I'm pretty sure in the new Batman film, the Bat logo is made up of the gun that killed his parents, I think. It's very edge
Oh, God, it
though I am
is,
looking
isn't
forward to
it?
that film.
Oh, God.
And I think his car is meant to be his dad's car or something like that. So the Batmobile is a modified
Oh,
Thomas Wayne-mobile.
He's got it dropped down. Got a classic.
Oh, my
Put
God.
some turbo blasters on this classic. Turbo blasters.
See, I can see a way. I can see a way through that, right? Like, if you think, because obviously Bruce Wayne's dad was also this like super rich, like really influential guy in a city that was like notorious for like really bad like organized crime and stuff. So his car, it's probably gonna be like bulletproof. It's probably gonna have like, you know, it's probably gonna have like compartments for like, you know, it's probably gonna have like escape like ways to like get over things, or like, you know what I mean? Like, I think it would have stuff like that. So it kind of tracks, but then it's like, well, I mean, Bruce Wayne is also like a mega billionaire, and it has been like however many years, like, so he could probably just make a new one. And I don't know. So I can see that, but the turning the gun into his logo thing, that's such a reach. That's really like, I feel like that exemplifies a lot of the problems with the Warner Brothers approach to that stuff. It's like they can't just do it. You know what I mean? It's like they have to think of some clever reason why this thing that has been popular for the best part of a century can like justify itself, and it's just. Yeah,
It's like they've done it in comics.
They don't
where
need to.
Like they've done it in comics where he melts down the gun and then forms it into like his bulletproof armor. But in this film, it's literally the gun split in half that makes the Bat logo. It's weird.
It's overthinking stuff.
Exactly,
Massively
yeah.
Overthinking it.
That's what I was
Which is
saying. It's like
massive
they
what
don't.
The Cruella thing is massively overthinking it. Everything.
Yeah.
Like, and it was the same with that fucking Han Solo film, and they overthought every detail of Han Solo just to cram it into the film. That stuff kind of bores me.
I'm sure we've talked about this before, but that film shouldn't exist. That should have been a Lando Calrissian film. But we're getting off topic.
But like Cruella, it probably would have a higher rating if the first 20 minutes of the film weren't told in flashback and like from her birth. And it starts with her birth and it starts in flashback, and I was like, I don't care about this. This is going on and on and on. Just give me the film. Like, why are you padding this runtime out with this crap? Like,
well, they have to pad it because there's no actual story to tell, is there? Because
honestly, they could just cut 20 minutes out of it. It doesn't have to be 2 hours fucking 17 or whatever it is.
It's 2 hours 17.
I can't remember how long the film is. It probably isn't that long, but I think
if that film is more than 90 minutes,
2 hours.
What do they do? What happens?
2 hours 15. Like,
is there a subplot with like a sassy best friend having a makeover, but then realizing that she didn't need the makeover because the guy that she was interested in was already interested in her? Like, I assume that's in the movie, but like
that's basically Cruella.
Okay,
that's basically the story.
She doesn't even have a sassy best friend. This is probably the issue.
She has two sassy best friends, actually. I quite like them. Played by, I think it's Joel Fry and Paul Walter Hauser. And I quite like Paul Walter Hauser.
Do they play like the henchmen that are in the cartoon?
Yeah. There's quite a lot of
Horace
sexual tension between her and the one of the henchmen, Jasper.
Okay.
Who's played by Hugh Laurie in the first film.
Yes. So these aren't a prequel to these films. Are they their own thing?
Yeah, basically it's an own thing.
Okay.
They exist in a different universe. It's not part of the MCU. It's like Deadpool.
The Dalmatian universe. Dalmatian.
Yeah. I can't wait for 101 Dalmatians Endgame when they somehow go back in time and I don't know, try and stop Cruella de Vil. I don't know.
I love that, the scene at the end with all the portals opening, but it's just a Dalmatian coming through each one.
Bring Jeff Daniels into it.
Do you remember he was a video game designer in the live action one?
He was a video game designer in the first one. I do remember this because I did watch 101 and 102 Dalmatians this week as well.
Oh,
amazing.
They're not in the second one, are they?
I'm a masochist. No, the second one is insane. It's absolutely fucking unleashed. It's 102 Dalmatians unleashed. It's fucking mental. And it does make a lick of sense. And Glenn Close gets turned into a cake at the end. That's the end of the song. Another new films I watched. From the Book of Saw. I watched Spiral.
Oh, is this the Chris Rock one?
Chris Rock, yeah, and other people. Samuel Jackson, of course, because Samuel Jackson. He has to be in every film. And I kind of hated it. That's about the end of that. They kept on saying this like bold new take on Saw, like it's from the Book of Saw. Again, never ever put book in the title of your film. That's boring. Never be from the book of this. Like that's the best producer note I ever heard for like a film once. And I think it's right. And it's not a new take on Saw. It's just Saw. I was really disappointed that it was just Saw. It was shot like Saw. It's all like Saw. It was just Saw. And it's disgusting. And I didn't enjoy it.
It's just IP milking, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I thought it was and it's 10 years since the last Saw, but apparently there was one like 2 or 3 years ago. So it hasn't been that long.
There was literally called Jigsaw, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No, it really hasn't been that long.
And they've definitely done the one that's like the prequel of like how Jigsaw became Jigsaw, haven't they? Like that must have happened. Yeah.
The lore of Saw, I think, is fucking amazing. Like to actually just the way they weave it all in is it just fills me with joy in the fact that like a character that's in half a scene in the first film will come back as the supervillain in the 7th film, and then revealed that they had a boss that was like the pizza delivery person in the 4th film that got their finger cut off by Saw or whatever. Like they bring back every single, like they kind of like grind out every single little element of those films to try and tie them into like an overarching themes. It's admirable and insane. Like, and it doesn't make any sense. I don't think anyone could explain to you the actual story of those films.
I love that. It feels like they had like one note from a focus group that said it was clever when they did something like that, and they were like, "Oh, that's what people want. We'll do it in every single film as much as possible, all the time. Like every character has to be someone."
And I also watched the new Conjuring film, The Devil Made Me Do It, which again was fine. Like all fine.
I liked those films up until up
Me
until
too.
the end, and they always lose the plot at the end, and you're like, oh dear.
Yeah, I agree. I love the idea of like these two kind of, I don't know, paranormal investigators, kind of exorcist people going around like real ghost stories, quote unquote real ghost stories, and telling you like the story behind them. I think that's prime for like a horror franchise, and I think that's really cool and fun. But every time I watch them, it is like about, I don't know, 3/4 of the way through, it just goes insane to points that I don't care about, or just too much, or it just, it goes too heavy in, maybe, is what it always seems to do. To the point that no one in this universe would ever not believe in like demons and ghosts. Like there'd be no question. Be like, of course, yeah. The devil made me do it. But they always try and pretend that it's like our world as well, and it always opens up with like, this is the real story of what happened. It's like, well, it's not, is it? Because the devil isn't real. But yeah, I enjoyed it.
The second one was based on that one in Britain, wasn't it? That girl who claimed she was possessed by the spirit of that dead guy or whatever. And do you remember?
Which one? Sorry, the second one.
The second one.
Yeah,
like
I know
the girls have said that it was a hoax, since then. So I'm surprised they decided to even bother using that as a basis. But oh well,
because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what's true or not.
Fair enough.
It is Enfield, isn't it? Because it's London, the Enfield.
Yeah.
Enfield haunting or whatever. I don't know what they.
But they tie it in with the nun and stuff like that, don't they? All their other kind of bullshit they kind of throw in there to kind of expand that universe.
And I think this suffers from not having James Wan direct it, if I'm honest. I think James Wan's quite a fun director. And the guy doing the third one isn't quite as inventive. Like,
I absolutely hated the Insidious movies, though. I hated those.
I don't think I saw them. them. I might have seen one of them, but I don't remember them if I did. And I never saw the Annabelle films, because they're also part of the same universe, aren't they?
And the Nun.
And stop saying the Nun.
There's another one as well, which I've forgotten, which...
I don't remember. I guess that is the... Because James Wan made Saw 1, didn't he, as well? James Wan, Saw 1.
He did, yeah.
So that's the tie for my films this week. But, I also, actually, to say one I loved, I watched a really old film that was directed by Powell and Pressburger, really famous kind of English directors from the 40s. And we will definitely be covering them when we do the 40s, because we cannot. But they did a film in 1948 called The Red Shoes, which is based upon the Hans Christian Andersen ballet, about a woman who gets red shoes and she dances basically until she dies, because they kind of compel her to dance. And it's a film based on like them putting on the production of the Red Shoes, and it's one of them, I don't know, just one of the most fabulous things I've ever seen on film by miles and miles and miles. Like,
sounds like a very early kind of Black Swan kind of thing.
Yeah,
maybe. Yeah. Sounds
yeah,
good.
totally. I'm sure Black Swan took a lot of inspiration from it. And like, there's a bit in the center, the middle of it, the center of the film, the middle of the film, where like they show like the kind of ballet, and it's all, they mix in like visual effects and lighting and kind of hallucinogenic, kind of psychedelic, almost kind of like imagery and puppetry and stuff like that. And it's
nice.
It must be like 20 minutes long, and it's absolutely completely captivating. I absolutely adored it. It's incredible that it's shot in 48. It could have been shot, if it was 70s or 80s, it'd still be the same. And I was reading through reviews of it at the time, and like English critics hated it, and they said like there was someone in the British press said it was downright un-British. That was one of their reviews of it. And I've said this on Letterboxd, but I couldn't think of a greater compliment to this film than that critique. Like, of course it is downright un-British. It's fucking wonderful. Like, it takes everything that British films never did at that time and just do something like grand and beautiful and like experimental. And I absolutely recommend it. It's wonderful.
Okay, I'm going to check that one out. So, Nadin, have you seen anything?
Mate, honestly, nothing new. I don't know if I've mentioned this, but there's a small human that lives in my house, and she's not even 2 years old, bless her. So I'm quite limited in my movie watching time. But we stuck on Ponyo, you know, the Studio Ghibli one. I think it came up like recommended on Netflix, so we like stuck that on, and it held our attention for a little while. So you know that's a good review as far as I'm concerned. Also, I've been spending a little bit more time reading as well. And in terms of watching stuff, it usually comes down to either like watching Dota 2 professional tournaments, esports, which is fun, or watching wrestling, specifically AEW, which I find fascinating. I think anyone who's interested in like I guess episodic storytelling, I think AEW's doing a lot of, or like gone back to doing a lot of the things that like made wrestling compelling in that way, particularly in AEW, and they're balancing a lot of things really well at the moment. And they just had like one of their big annual like pay-per-views the other week, which I think did some really cool stuff. But yeah, as far as like watching movies and things, like it's probably I'm probably in the wrong place to say this, but it's just not something that I feel like I want to like prioritize at the moment. I think especially because
that's so cool.
Yeah, and I mean I think you two know me well enough to know that like when I'm watching a movie, it's not an activity where I just sort of have it on in the background and not think about it. You know what I mean? It's like that's just not how I like to engage with films. Whereas like, you know, if I put on the Dota, or if I put on wrestling or something, it is the kind of thing that you don't have to like fully commit your attention to in that way. So that's me at the moment.
There's definitely different like levels of films. I think there's for me there's definitely like a category of I can put that on and kind of do some cooking or kind of have dinner and maybe do something else while it's on, and then another category of like, no, if I'm putting this on, I'm absolutely.
See, this is my problem though, because even that kind of, and I talked to you two about this stuff, like that very kind of like almost like the family film level, or like I find the decision making process like just as interesting. Like because I feel like if a movie has a goal, then it's interesting to see. And I'm sure you agree with this, but it's just something that's probably like more important to me than like most people when I'm watching something. It's like if a film has a goal, I'm more interested in like how well it achieves the goal that it had, rather than like any kind of like approaching like objective standard of like quality or anything. Actually, one film I hadn't seen before that I did watch recently, which is probably a good example of this, is a movie whose name I will remember now. It's Palm Springs. Which obviously it's very derivative in a lot of ways, like for obvious reasons. Sure. But I found that a movie, like I found it a great exercise in something that was obviously trying very hard to do one thing to a varying degree of success. You know what I mean? Like, obviously compared to the obvious comparison of Groundhog Day, which I feel absolutely nails what it's trying to do up and down, which is why it's, like, you know, such a beloved film. It's like something that I feel is pretty much timeless. Like this one, it's trying to say so much more. Like it's trying so much harder. And because it's trying so much harder, it's more noticeable, like when it falls short in areas. And I just find that fascinating, like the comparison between the two. Like to me, looking at a movie like that and thinking about like where it does better than other similar films, but then also like where it falls short. And obviously,
it's sometimes really obvious when you go like they had one too many ideas.
Yes.
Yeah. They really, and that would have helped them to kind of look at that again.
I did like that film, but I was saying to Liam a couple of weeks ago when we watched it, I just think it should have ended one scene earlier. Like once they go into the cave, there's another scene that precedes that, and I think it should have just ended like there.
Could be. I mean, yeah, it was just. Yeah, I think the whole thing it definitely could have benefited from like a really brutal edit. Like it felt like the kind of project. It felt like the kind of project that was like, you know, it's almost like like an auteurship thing, isn't it? It's like they had a very specific idea of what they wanted it to be, and there weren't enough people to tell them no. Like they needed someone in there who could just say like, this isn't important, like just get rid of it. You know what I mean? But it felt like they were it was just like it was just too long a lead. Like if they'd just been pulled in a little bit, or just like allowed some things to sit a little bit more. Like, cause there were some times where it felt like they had a little bit of respect for their audience in terms of letting people work things out for themselves. But then like there'd be a moment 2 scenes later where they just totally spell it out and just say it down, just say it down the barrel, and you're like, oh, okay. So we're just fully acknowledging this idea that you alluded to like 10 minutes earlier. Weird.
It feels, a lot of ways, it feels like a film that was very much like, let's say 2 or 3 people in a room going, yeah, that's really cool. Let's put that in. And that made a really fun and energetic film, like a really lot of energy to it, a lot of kind of cool stuff. But it did feel like, as you say, it needed someone to be going, we don't need that. Maybe that might feel really weird when it works. Maybe that might actually not particularly kind of hit the mark if you do that. So maybe
and it's weird. Like
it did feel like a lot of people really enjoying
it. It just felt like such a swerve for me. How like the film is it's a film about nihilism, right? Mm-hmm. And it's obviously a film that exists because of Groundhog Day. You know, this isn't like a film with a similar idea that like exists independently. Like this movie exists because of Groundhog Day, and I think it exists because of Groundhog Day in the way that they felt like they could take that idea further with like explicitly talking about the more philosophical elements of it. Yeah. Like one of the kind of famous things like that people will tell you about Groundhog Day is that like in the original source material, it's made very explicit that Bill Murray's character is essentially locked in this time loop for what could be like millions of years.
Yes.
Like millions of years, like reliving this day. And in the movie, that's kind of like toned down a bit. You know, and it fit like obviously it's
out of that a bit.
Exactly, yeah. Whereas like in Palm Springs, it's like they're obviously trying to like reintroduce that idea, and it's heavily alluded to that he's like. I think like at one point he says like he can't remember what his job was before. I think it might like he might say afterwards that he was just joking, and of course he remembers or something. But it's definitely like strongly suggested that it's been like a long time. And, you know, obviously he's initially presented as this kind of nihilist, but then it's him as a character that pulls the other person trapped in this. Sorry, spoilers for everything, obviously, but who pulls the other character who's trapped in there with him, like, out of that nihilistic phase, or like tries to explain to her that, like, even though other people forget, or even though you don't see the long lasting effects on other people for your actions, you still like remember it and the pain, and like he says explicitly like the pain that you cause is real.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really sort of there was a lot going on with that character that I forget the actor's name. I should remember it. I've watched enough Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but like
so Andy Samberg and then Christian
Andy Samberg. I couldn't remember if that was his real name or if that was his character's name in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. But yeah, I thought like there was so much like interesting things going on with that character that everything else felt in service of that. And because it was all in service to that character, it was kind of like weaker because of that. And maybe there was, you know, because he is a comedian after all, like maybe that is actually what was happening. You know what I mean?
Well, it's like the whole subplot with J.K. Simmons, that feels like that could have been the movie in itself, just that. Do you know what I mean? And it's just like it's one little scene at the beginning and then they come back to it at the end, and it feels like, again, like you said, like too many ideas maybe that kind of mixed up with it. But
that's so weird as well, because what's his name? Juno's dad, like he also is there to facilitate bringing Andy Samberg back from this nihilistic pit that he's fallen into. But he only does that after Andy Samberg has already explained to the other character in the loop that she also shouldn't fall into the pit of nihilism. So it's this weird...
Yeah.
It's just things like that where it didn't, like, not all the dots connect, like, smoothly.
And it's one of those things that sometimes, that because they've used too many ideas in the film, they start making you question stuff. So, like, they explicitly introduce the idea into this that I think it's... is it Christine? She becomes like an expert in physics, like astrophysics or whatever like that. And because they introduced the idea that basically you've got forever in this, that you can become an expert in anything you want to be, you kind of start thinking, well, why did you leave at this point? Why didn't you just take another course? Why didn't you just do another thing? Like, why didn't you just utilize the time a little more?
Yeah, why you've got this time?
Introduced the idea that it... Yeah, you've introduced a kind of like ticking clock that doesn't really exist in the kind of manners and the stuff. And because if they hadn't bothered with that kind of side plot of it, I don't think your brain would have been questioning it really as much.
But then again, the only reason why she became like this physicist is just to get out of that situation. That was her driving factor. There was no, it wasn't like anything else. So I think it was all right for it.
I guess that was the motivation, wasn't it? Like,
I had a thought, like, watching that film, though. I think Andy Samberg would have been quite a good, older Peter Parker Spider-Man. What do you reckon?
Yeah, it works, I guess.
Yeah. I thought he'd be a good, like, live-action Peter B. Parker kind of guy.
It definitely tracks. I mean, obviously, the movie version, I feel like is slightly gone away from it now, but I do feel like Spider-Man as a character is like just a nerd who's got a mouth on him, right? Which is Andy Samberg can play that, you know. So yeah, I mean that totally works. Which is weird because, like, you know, the Tobey Maguire version, he was kind of like just a nerd, you know, and the Tom Holland version is kind of like he feels like much less of a nerd, like he feels like a regular kid who's just very smart, which I think is what they were going for. Even though he's obviously being bullied still, but it was only really being bullied in the way that like everyone is.
Yeah, but I think the Tom Holland one is actually more representing kind of like younger generation version of nerd at high school. I think that's actually what's quite successful with the newest film, is that they made high school feel quite new, and it wasn't like the writers writing like a 90s high school. Basically, there's the nerd, and they like Dungeons and Dragons and video games or something like. It's not the way. It's not in the things that he likes though. It's just in the way that he acts. Like Tom Holland as a man is just like so supremely confident in himself. Like you can tell. I mean, just like the way he holds himself, the way he speaks. Like even with as young as he is, like he's so sure of himself. You know, and you can't help but like have that translate across to like, and all the dance training for a start. Like anyone who's had like a decent amount of dance, anyone who's had a decent amount of dance training, like the way that they walk across a room on camera, like unless they're purposefully making themselves, like it's not like he purposefully hunched or anything, or like, and I don't think they should have done that for a second. Like they shouldn't have like. You know, they shouldn't have oversold it in the start, but I just feel like him as an actor, like to me, he's just not really believable as someone who would have a hard time in high school. And then, of course, like he ends up like he doesn't even pursue like this girl who's like, who's like the object of his fantasies and is like part of the popular. Like she goes after him, you know what I mean? So the premise that he's like this put upon nerdy character just completely falls apart immediately. Anyway, but then that's what they were doing, right? It was right for that, definitely. Because I think the issue with the Marvel Spider-Man, and I do like them, but the issue with the Marvel Superman is Iron Man, and the problem is they give Spider-Man too much. Like he gets so much given to him by this super powerful like benefactor who becomes like a father figure and everything else that. It's almost like it breaks the character, because he immediately goes from like, I'm a bit unfortunate kind of, you know, kid living in New York to basically I'm an Avenger within like weeks. And they're kind of pretending that there's a struggle there, but there isn't really. He's just got, here's your £1 billion new suit, here's this kind of thing. And I think that breaks the character a little bit too much, really.
No, I think you're right, but I think there's two reasons for that aren't really justifiable, like in universe. I think one is because obviously all the disagreements about about whether they were allowed to use the character or not meant that they probably felt like they were playing catch up, and they wanted to get to Endgame with him being like credible within that environment. And I think to do that, like he can't just be a kid in a wetsuit, you know what I mean? Like he needs a little bit, and especially with all the stuff in space and everything, like he needs a little bit of a leg up. And I actually think the second one to me, and this is actually something me and Jones disagreed about a lot with Iron Man 3, because I think so much of what they tried to do with Iron Man in the MCU and the through line throughout it is the idea that Tony Stark is Iron Man.
Right.
Like even in the whole thing, like the I am Iron Man thing,
Mm-hmm.
like that's the point. It's like it's like the suit isn't Iron Man. Tony Stark is Iron Man.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that was the message that's basically the one thing that he really teaches Peter Parker, right? In the new films, is like the one thing that he really teaches him as this mentor father figure is, and I think he even directly says it in the movie. He says like, if you're nothing without the suit, then you don't deserve it.
Right,
you know,
right,
or something along those lines.
That.
The idea that like if when you take the suit away, then you're nothing, then you were never that thing to begin with.
Right.
And I think that, you know, that's obviously the kind of, in my mind, that's like the justification of what they're trying to do with it. But I think the main thing was they just saw Endgame coming.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and they were like,
absolutely.
we need to get this kid on a level where.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think they did. I think they did okay. I mean, just thank God they didn't do the retread of the whole like origin and everything again. You know.
Yeah, and Uncle Ben and everything else like that. And it's
exactly.
talking about Iron Man 3. I think Iron Man 3 is the only film for me that Iron Man, the only Iron Man film I think that works. And there's actually has an interesting thing about Iron Man is Iron Man 3. And the more I've watched it, the more it's jumped up in my expectations in those films. I think it's by far the best Iron Man film, and I think it actually gives something like, it actually gives a struggle and an interesting character aspect to Tony Stark that I think is lacking in every other time they kind of put him on screen, and I wish, I don't know, maybe it might have been better if Iron Man 3 was embraced a little more, because I think when they have then used him again in like Civil War and stuff like that, I think they just lack the. They drop anything about Tony Stark being anything else but like basically the best person in the world. Like, and it's really interesting to see Iron Man 3 him go through those struggles and him go through that kind of that fight. Really, I just think it works really well.
I mean, well, that's the thing with these characters, though, right? It's like the idea. I mean, the whole point of a superhero is it's like, you know, if you're like not a character who always tries to do the right thing no matter the odds, then you're not a superhero, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, and it goes back to like Tony Stark is Iron Man, the suit isn't Iron Man. So even when you take the suit away from Tony Stark, he's still going to try and do what needs to be done. Like he just doesn't have that tool available to him. And I do think that's when the Marvel films are at their best, right? Because they've got so good at doing a formula. Yes. Which was obviously borrowed very heavily from the Sam Raimi, like the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, like, because Iron Man is basically that Spider-Man movie, right? Like it treads a very similar path.
Yeah, sure.
And they've kind of like reproduced that and refined it because they've had to introduce all these characters, so there's been like some element of that like origin for all of them. But I think when those movies are at their best is like when that just falls apart a bit.
Yeah,
and I think that Iron Man 3. Like, I understand why some people don't like it, but I think it falls into that similar thing along with like the first Guardians of the Galaxy, along with the Thor movie. That's the good one, the one with the subtitle. Which one's that?
Ragnarok.
The one with Immigrant Song. Yeah. Ragnarok. Anyway, we always end up talking about superhero movies when I come on here, because it is my guilty pleasure. I don't know how we got here, but
it's because I said Andy Samberg should have played Spider-Man at some point.
Oh yeah. But yeah, Andy Samberg, like into the Spider-Verse, which is the best Marvel movie by a long way. you know, Andy Samberg could totally have played the
Peter B.
Peter B or Peter C. Maybe we'll see it, you know, because Spider-Verse is coming back, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. They just cast Spider-Woman, I think. That came out yesterday. So they definitely are doing it.
Going back to the Palm Spring thing, it's funny though. At the same time Netflix released that, I think Amazon released their own like time loop film. Yeah, it's called the Map of Tiny Perfect Things. But I think it's more of a. I think it's a bit more of a young adult kind of story as opposed to like a bit more mature.
Well, Palm Springs, I think was a Hulu thing.
Oh, was it?
And then obviously like Netflix picked it up like eventually, which is when I watched it because lol Hulu. I'm not going to get that. I don't have time to watch anything on my Netflix account. Let alone it's all bloody Peppa Pig.
Palm Springs is an
and
Amazon
that's
release in the UK. It's not a Netflix release.
Oh, is it?
I guess we watched it on Amazon then. But yeah,
I know we get letters if I didn't correct that.
Letters all our
handwritten letters from Andy Samberg. P.S. I could totally play any version of Peter Parker. Who would Andy Samberg play in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? He would have been a good Ant-Man if Paul Rudd wasn't.
He'd be another
available.
Spider-Man from another universe in the multiverse. Why not?
Yeah, could be. He could be the Spider-Man who was never mentored by Tony Stark.
That'd be much better. There we go. A crappy one.
He Reed Richards.
He could be.
I don't get the intelligence thing. I don't think that would work.
I do think Seth Rogen should play the Thing in the next Fantastic Four movie, though. I think he'd be a good Ben.
I think actually he would be quite good. If I'm very, I think actually he would be quite good.
So yeah, give me them monies, Marvel. I've given you a good idea there.
Isn't that guy meant to be a very sort of military guy though? Isn't that his thing? Like he was like the sort of ass kicker army dude.
Hey, he was the Green Hornet. He can kick some ass.
That's true. He was the Green Hornet.
He's Jewish, isn't he?
He is, yeah.
But there's
Mm-hmm.
that.
It's got that going
cast
for
a
him.
Jewish person to play it. I tell you, do you know who my
one of God's chosen people,
Mr. Fantastic casting is? Who I think would do really good is and not this. I don't want it to be John Krasinski and his wife. That would really annoy me. If they do.
Is it the guy from Midsummer? Because I remember you saying that before.
Did I say it before? Yeah, William Jackson Harper, the guy from Midsummer and The Good Place. I think he would do it awesome, like Mr. Fantastic.
All right, I'm going to make a suggestion. Don't write it off immediately, right? Think about it. But what if Benedict Cumberbatch played Mr. Fantastic and Doctor Strange at the same time?
Why not?
And that was... Why not? Why couldn't he be, why couldn't it be that one of them was from a timeline where they were accidentally switched at birth, so they had a very different life, but they were still like the same person, like, and you know what I mean? Like they still had the super genius thing going for them. And that's part of the Fantastic Four, like, accident, right? Because they're in space and it creates like the weird like time loop situation. And then it's like flashback to when Benedict Cumberbatch is doing his, I've seen 14 million versions of this. And it turns out that it's not the thing where it's like Benedict Cumberbatch says, Tony Stark, I've seen it, but I can't tell you because it might change. And the answer is, do the really fucking obvious thing. Which, like, if you knew you could have done that all along, like, why didn't you just do that? If you just built... Anyway... But that's the real thing. The real thing is he has to cause the accident that creates the Fantastic Four that also sets off a chain reaction that brings the guy with the big head to Earth. And yeah, I'm just saying, put me in charge. I've got ideas. I don't know. There's the grey one with the green hat, and I don't know. They've got to pick a new villain for the next arc, right?
I know exactly who you mean. It's gone out of my head now because I can't have anything to the man with a big head. No, who's Silver?
I don't think I'm in Galactus.
I think
I'm in.
Surely.
Do I? I don't
know.
Galactus. Maybe I do.
Well, I think you've cracked it anyway. The big problem with the Marvel Universe is that Benedict Cumberbatch isn't playing more characters.
Yeah.
So it's definitely
Why did he have to be American? It's so off-putting.
I know.
It is
And
really
it just
off-putting.
makes the whole, like, he's just Tony Stark again so much worse. Like, if he'd just been British, like, if he'd just played Sherlock,
If
you know?
it's worse
like,
now, it's going to get worse because they are absolutely positioning him to be the head of the Marvel Universe for the next
think
few
so?
years.
Really?
Yeah.
No.
Doctor Strange and Spider-Man will be the two leads in the Marvel Universe now.
I've always hated his American accent, always, in any film he's been in. And I don't get me wrong, I like Benedict Cumberbatch, but his American accent just does not work for me.
No, it doesn't work for me either because he's the most English man in the universe.
Yeah.
Like, he's so English that his family colonizing fucking countries. Like it's ridiculous to say that he's American. Like
Benedict Cumberbatch. Yeah, exactly. Do you think well, I mean, he's going to be one of the, like, poster people, I guess.
yeah,
But it's weird because I guess the kind of, if you want to call it, like, phase one or whatever, was very much like Captain America and Iron Man, wasn't it? Which is why they've been sort of retired now.
and I
guess, well, because it's Captain Marvel, right?
They're
Like,
positioning Black Panther for that role, but I don't know what they'll do with that now. Like, and that's going to be completely up in the air, really.
I think it's a shame they don't
Such a
recast
shame.
it, to be honest. Because he was only in, like, 1.5 films, really? And I think, no disrespect to, what's his name? This is real disrespectful, I've forgotten. It's Chadwick Boseman. Obviously, it's really sad that he passed away. But I don't know, I just think it's a shame that, you only get to see this character, like, in a few films. Like, I think, that character could be explored a bit more. I don't know. Don't know what you got.
I think the good thing about the setup is, you can very easily pass the mantle along to a different actor, a different character. I'm sure there's plenty of precedent in the books for that.
But there's already precedent in the films, basically. He's the second Black Panther in the films already, so there's no reason to not do a third Black Panther. I don't think recasting is it. I think even though, as you say, he's only in like a film and a half, basically, that he made such a big impact on the people that very much care about that, and then we're looking for that reputation. I just think recasting it would come across badly. But
that'd be so good anyway, because his whole thing was like pulling Wakanda out of this slightly fascist, like, isolated kind of deal, and he was like, no, we're gonna like live up to what we believe about ourselves, and we're gonna be part of the world. And I think that brilliantly sets up someone to take on the mantle, because then it becomes, well, he made all these promises, he said he was going to do all these things, and then it's just up to the new person to do it, right? And it's like, well, it was easy for him to say, we're going to be world leaders, we're going to fix all these problems, we're going to do this and that, and then suddenly someone else is sitting there and everyone's looking at them going, how? And they don't have the option of hiding away anymore. I think that's super interesting.
The thing that I guess would be the obvious thing is if they hadn't killed Michael B. Jordan in the first film.
Yeah.
And I think that would be the obvious thing to step in and use Killmonger. So maybe change your name. But maybe they'll just do a hand waving of he didn't die, really, because I think that would make a lot of sense. Because his plot is very much about the themes that you're kind of talking about, really, that they can move forward with. Anyway,
we've talked a lot about Marvel, as we always do.
Moving forward, shall we move forward with the show?
Let's do it.
So today's episode, we're looking at the 1983 kind of medieval sci-fi fantasy film, Krull.
On a distant planet, a great kingdom was ravaged by beings who came from the future to conquer the universe. Now, the only survivors follow a doubtful seer and a throneless king.
They will hold her in the Black Fortress. You must have help.
Thieves, bandits, fighters and brawlers. Desperate men. Those are the kind of men I need. Well, you heard him. We are now an army.
At the end of an impossible journey, they must fight an invincible enemy.
Here's the knowledge you seek.
I shall be your king.
In the fortress, you will face more than the Slayers.
What is about to happen to them could never have happened on Earth. Columbia Pictures presents a world apart from anything you have seen before. Krull.
Shit name to say, Krull.
Krull. Yeah, it doesn't exactly roll off the
throat.
tongue, does it? Yeah, Krull.
It's very much like the end of a sentence word.
Of course, 1983, a year famous for being the year before I was born.
Hey,
But now that we've talked a lot about Marvel, I think one really interesting thing about this film that you can't escape from is the fact that I believe it came out the same year as Return of the Jedi. Is that right?
It did.
Yeah, just a little bit after, I think.
It
And
came
I think
out
that
3
like
weeks later and was crushed at the box office by
oh,
it. Still.
3 weeks. 3 weeks after Return of the Jedi. Oof.
Not good.
And it's so interesting, I think, watching a movie like this in that context of like, so the first two, like Empire Strikes Back has already come out, right?
Yep.
Like, and from what I read quickly on Wikipedia before this, like the idea, this film started its journey in like 1980. So they've had all this lead in time. They've had like Empire Strikes Back come out, and then they just like, and then this is what they have.
Yeah.
Like, I just, like, if you put this, like, and I think it actually says a lot about just what a seismic leap forward Star Wars was in so many ways, just for movie making.
Absolutely.
I was wondering how
Rather than anything particular.
I was wondering how long it would take until Star Wars was brought into the conversation, and literally, it was the first fucking thing Paul said.
Well, you know, we stopped talking about Marvel, so we're gonna. But I think it's like, of course.
Hey, you know who did the comic book adaptation though?
Go on.
Marvel.
Oh shit! It all comes full circle. But you can't
talk about
like
this without talking about Star Wars. The whole point of this is that Star Wars existed. Like,
and you can't you can't separate. Yeah, you can't separate it. And I think like any time like for me personally, like anytime I watch anything that's outside of my like personal cultural experience, it's like you have to find those kind of touchstones to understand like, okay, well, what movie, well, like what context was this movie made in, right? Like what was the world like when this thing was made, and how did people's ideas of what movies were, of what fantasy was, of what action was, all these things, like how did that inform, or even the idea, like in this movie, the idea of like, I mean, how many female characters are there in this movie? One? There's the princess, right?
There's three, no, four. You've got the queen, or the princess. You've kind of got the spider witchy woman.
The Widow of the Web.
Oh, yeah,
You've got one of Liam Neeson's many wives, who is only brought in to cook food. And then you've kind of got the Liam
Neeson's one character trait. Which does that even count?
Like,
but so they're all like weirdly.
I totally forgot about that weird scene. That she just
in
a little kind of scene. She just goes, "Ah!"
I know when you go back to Star Wars, really, there's only one female in all those films, and that's obviously Princess Leia. But she gets so much to do. Whereas in this film, the princess in this film does nothing, like literally nothing. Like apparently it was
so disappointing to me.
Apparently it was written that she was going to have a heel turn at some point, so obviously that the villain was going to like corrupt her or something, and that would have been way more interesting.
She was meant to be the antagonist at the end of the film. That was in the original script, and they decided against that basically and gave her.
They wanted to remain keep her pure or something, and that's such a bad decision.
But I think that's why I find this fascinating, because I think like in the context of like the films I watched growing up, like Star Wars was just such a huge factor in those movies, just the way they were made, the expectations of the audience. You know, you watch movies that we would have watched as like young kids, or, you know, Back to the Future, Ghostbusters, or, you know, all of those things all lean so heavily on things that were laid down at that time. And then you look at Krull and you're like, so that this exists at the same time. They have Empire Strikes Back to draw on.
They have the same stuff, yeah.
Same cinematographer
but
as well.
Such like, but it's such like one of the first notes that I wrote down while I was watching this is like what year is it? Yeah. so many of these standards that they fall back on, like it seems to be like the comfortable place that these filmmakers exist in is that kind of like, you know, Errol Flynn. Like, there's a reason that like the main guy looks like Errol Flynn. It's because they wanted their main guy to look like Errol Flynn.
Well,
they wanted him to wear stripy trousers and swing from a chandelier, which I think he does in the first 5 minutes of the film.
Exactly. I think you nailed that, because like the reason like this is kind of even on our list, and we know where every time we're trying to populate these kind of like lists that we do each year, it's the 80s is not going to be the 50s for our list. You know, we're looking at films that kind of like pinpoint the era and give us stuff to kind of like think about. And the interesting thing about the 80s is you see a shift. It's basically where like new Hollywood from the 70s is now hit the kind of end of the 70s, which blockbusters get invented, you know, Jaws, Star Wars, Superman, like, and that gets pushed into the early 80s now. And you're still getting these old school filmmakers though who are making films, like, so you're still getting people like David Lean, you know, Lawrence of Arabia, and he's making these epic grand films in the 80s still, but he's doing it in such an old style and only harking back to these old kind of epics of the 60s, like you say, Errol Flynn looking further back, like that's their touchstones. The director of this, Peter Yates, you know, he's a 60s filmmaker really. He did Bullet and things like that. Like he's arcing back to much older things when he's making these. So he's not, then they exist because of Star Wars, but it's this really interesting mix of classic Hollywood trying to do like modern blockbusters, and they haven't quite decided what that track is yet and know what like's really going to work for that. And I think that's why you get at this time period, you know, we talked about it in the Bruce Lee episode, you get that Bruce Lee-ification, I can't remember, that Bruce Lee like films that come out after his, and we are totally in the 80s now. We're doing Star Wars films, and like a Star Wars type film is what everyone is trying to make continuously, and this is the best example I think we could find and do an episode on. But there are so many films that come out in this time that are just doing Star Wars.
Star Wars is a lot like The Matrix. Like, do you remember when The Matrix came out? There were so many films that followed that and trying to be The Matrix, and all failed. Like, same as Star Wars. Like, after Star Wars, you had Flash Gordon, Excalibur, Hawk the Slayer. You had even Conan was all right, but like
Last Starfighter, Masters of the Universe, like Battlestar Galactica.
I mean, Flash Gordon's not the best example because it is the second best movie ever made, but I see your point.
Go on, give us a little blast.
Gordon's alive!
There it is.
And you get like Roger Corman's doing his own stuff, Battle Beyond the Stars. You get like Star Crash, Orin as well. I watched Orin this week, like Battlestar. And you also get like, you know, I think one that I think we've all seen, but maybe not. And it became a classic later, but we know it as Turkish Star Wars. But The Man Who Saved the World is the original name of it. Like, and you get all these films which are getting piled out that are just doing a Star Wars. Like, let's go do a space opera. You know, we haven't done space operas before. Now we do these space operas. And this film, Krull, is very much them going, let's do a Star Wars. But it's also, I think, owes a huge debt to Raiders of the Lost Ark and Excalibur.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, it's not just building on the 1978 Star Wars, it's building on that 1981 film. So it's building on like Excalibur especially. This film is so much like sword and sorcery, more than like that space adventure. And then Raiders kind of like elements of these like different set pieces, different areas, different like pulpy kind of swashbuckling. And I think and being able to push this out as a summer film, summer blockbusters are still new in this time period. Like, so, and this is what all kind of merges together to them try and make this script. And Paul, you already alluded on this, but the production time for this film is ridiculous. I think they were in production for 2 years or something. to make this
Yeah,
film.
but from when they started shooting till it came out, it's only like 6 months.
Yeah, then they nailed it. Well, not nailed it, but then they went for it. I mean, but so the original title of this film was The Dragons of Krull, and it was meant to be like the beast was meant to be some sort of dragon, and it was some sort of venture to go kill a dragon on a planet. This has led to mountains of like evidence out there that people say it was meant to be a Dungeons and Dragons film when it first came out. But Gary Gygax, I believe he says
Gygax. You pronounce the X, yeah.
He's said quite a few times that they never approached him, and as far as he's aware, it was never going to be a Dungeons and Dragons film. But clearly, like, that's what everyone was seeing when this was coming through, like the kind of systems and getting put up. And basically, they said the first script was too boring, and they gave it to the screenwriter of the sequel to Any Which Way But Loose. Do you know Any Which Way But Loose?
Clyde the orangutan, isn't it?
Yeah. So they gave it to this Any Which Way.
I wrote a pilot for a cartoon with an orangutan called Clyde in it as one of the main characters. Anyway, carry
based
on
the drawings that I did, Clyde Norris.
Clyde and Norris, yeah.
There you go.
Clyde and Norris.
Norris was a hedgehog. We'll talk about that another time.
BoJack Horseman beat us to the punch on that one, though, didn't they?
And yeah, they did a much better job than we could have ever done.
Hogwash.
But yeah,
anyway,
they give it to the screenwriter of Any Which Way You Can. He churns out this script, and they bring on David Yates. Basically, he's brought on to make it. David Yates is a odd director. Really, he did Bullet in the 60s. He did Breaking Away, the cycling film. I don't know if you've seen that. Really odd decision to give it to this guy to make the film, because he's not really handled anything like this before. To the point of when he was actually making this film, he quit in the middle and took a holiday. He went on holiday to the Caribbean for something like a couple of weeks, I think it was, and just left like the assistant supervisor director to kind of take over for a couple of weeks or something. Maybe it was only a couple of days, but he definitely left. And he kind of was excited to do a film that wasn't about reality, that you didn't have to research for, that you didn't have to think about. Was basically what I get from his kind of like way he talks. He goes,
and it turns out it was actually way harder.
Yeah. He was like, you just had to use your imagination. Your imagination's endless, so it was really fun to do. And it's like, no, you still have to.
Yeah. Creative energy is infinite. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And no, go on.
Sorry, carry on. So I know you're like dropping facts right now, so I don't want to intervene too much.
No, go on.
I just thought it was interesting, like talking about the whole like Dragons of Krull thing and the change from that, because that was obviously when the decision was made to go from like a more pure fantasy into like the sort of sci-fi fantasy kind of thing. I imagine.
I imagine
like going from it's a dragon to it's a spaceship.
Yeah.
And I think a core part of that is actually a lot of the visual design around like the kind of evil elements of the film, and a lot of the moments that are meant to be like scary just land so well and so much more consistently than anything else in the film.
The production design is amazing. So like that in that fortress, and there's a weird like forest at the end that they kind of go into, this like rocky weird forest. But even like the castle at the beginning and the suits of armor that they all wear, like to me promise so much more than the film actually delivered. Because once they start going on their quest, and even though the sets are really, because it's all sets when they're in woodlands and stuff like that.
23 sets it was at Pinewood. 23 sets, including like the 007 stage set.
I just don't think they went interesting enough with that. There was no like so when they go to the swamp in Empire Strikes Back, you see things like weird creatures flying around or crawling around just in the foreground, just to kind of say it's a foreign land. It's like it's not Earth. It's totally different. Whereas I don't think they kind of nailed that in this. Like
it's funny, isn't it? It's like. It's like they made a lot of the foundational elements of the world building, but then forgot to build anything on it.
Yeah, I absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like there's all this setting, and then none of that really matters. Although probably my favorite moment in the film, apart from every single close up of the Cyclops, which every single one is a cinematic masterpiece.
I swear he's sometimes meant to be winking, but how do you wink with one eye? Like.
Yeah, I think he's meant to be just emoting. But my favorite bit in the film is actually right near the start, in like the overlong, slightly wonky like action scene at the start, where there's a bit where like the princess is escaping through the secret tunnel, and there's like one of the guards is having like a one-on-one duel on the stairs with one of the Slayers. I love that they just didn't give a shit about the names of the evil stuff. The Beast, the Slayers, the Castle, or whatever it is. Anyway, so he's having this sword fight with the thing, but it's established earlier through movement of the guards that they cannot turn their head. Like
Batman
like Christian Bale in Batman Begins, yeah. So they can't turn their head like that. And also they have floor-length capes, and he's fighting on stairs walking backwards. So he's in a situation where he's like holding his cape kind of up by his hip in one hand, like away from the camera, and trying to sword fight like on some stairs while walking backwards, unable to turn his head, and watching this guy trying his best.
It was quite funny.
Like a metaphor for life, you know.
Films like they train for months doing these elaborate fight scenes, but they do it out of costume, and then they put the costume on. They think, oh fuck, we can't do any of that. So literally, all we can do is a simple back and forth motion with the swords, and that's it. Like, it gets reduced.
Well, this is actually
that happened on Master of the Universe and stuff.
This is actually worse than that. The poor guy Marshall, the actor from this, Ken Marshall, he trained for months and months and months on this. They put him through massive, rigorous like training and exercising and horse riding, teaching and swashbuckling. Like, Yates was obsessed with this being like a swashbuckling adventure. That's what he really wanted it to be. So that's why you see the action at the start is meant to be all this kind of like swords fighting and things. But however, like, they wanted unique squashbuckling and unique weapons. So all the pre-production design was designing these unique weapons that didn't look like normal swords and didn't look like normal daggers. They went through all these like choreography and costuming with these weird weapons, and then they got on set and decided that they didn't work. So they just gave him normal looking swords and stuff like that. So all the kind of pre-production elements that make these things interesting, unique, was scrapped, and then they just filmed him kind of like jumping down a few stairs. And added to the fact, as you were saying, like, they couldn't look at the costumes. These costumes for the Slayers were designed 10 days before shooting. Like, I think, they basically had to do 24-hour nights of just making 20 costumes, I think it was, they made in the end. They were doing 12-hour shifts just to pull out these costumes that no one had decided to build and no one decided to properly test before actually just shoving at like people on set wearing them. And there's a bit right at the beginning when the prince is escaping down a corridor, and she's being led by someone, one of the guards, and you can tell that poor guy cannot see where he's going. He's walking down this corridor like he's a blind man, like touching the side of the walls and like looking down in little steps. I felt so bad for the actor.
You need to train to wear these costumes. It's like when they did RoboCop, they put Peter Weller in the suit and expected him to like act like 10 seconds later as soon as he got in the costume, and he started to wear this costume. He's like, I can't move. I need to learn how to move in this costume, and kind of, even if I can't move properly, I can put it into the performance that it's awkward to move in and kind of work it in that way.
Yeah.
If these films, they don't give them the luxury of doing that. They just kind of like, okay, you in the costume, now go. And so you just get these kind of really awkward kind of like scenes and scenarios. Yeah, it's just bizarre.
I know, that's such a thing, especially with these kind of like more background characters and stuff, that they just turn up on set and get put in a costume and they're like, right, you're going to fight these guys, and they don't really tell them anything else. It's like the famous story of the guy who was like an extra on Return of the Jedi, and he thought that C-3PO was like a man in a golden set of armor or something, because he had literally no frame of reference for anything that was going on at all. But he was just stood there like being a Star Wars guy, you know, applauding them not giving Chewbacca a medal. You know, all that kind of stuff. But
well, it's like, look at the
nerd memes pulling them out.
The first Star Wars, you got all the stormtroopers running out of the door, and the one just clocks his head off the top of the door because he's too tall. He couldn't see what he's doing.
We see the one in this one.
It's kind of tall for a stormtrooper.
The stunt actors jump off like little cliffs to jump on horses, and one of them.
Oh, and he completely misses the horse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they just leave it in. That whole sequence is so funny to me, because it's like they set up. This is like filmmaking at its purest for me personally, because they set up this scenario where they found out where they have to go and they only have a certain amount of time to get there, and it's a million miles away, and they're like, how are we going to go a million miles? That's impossible in this fantasy world that, like, you don't know. But then another character just goes, fire mares. It's like, oh shit, I forgot about fire mares that can easily go a million miles in a day. What an idiot I am. And then there's just, so that is resolved in like 2 seconds, but then the scene of them wrangling the fire mares takes another 5 minutes. And then there's another 5 minutes of them riding the fire mares, which is some really nice shots actually. I really like the sort of thin like line of fire across these like big landscapes, which again is some of the really nice parts of the movie, these like big sweeping landscapes.
You should see the behind the scenes footage of that, because those Clydesdale horses are massive. They're the biggest horses. Very much. And you should see them on these they've got them on treadmills, and that's how they achieve those like green screen chroma key shots.
Oh, I was wondering, because when the Cyclops is like going to like catch them up and he's clearly like on a green screen, I was like, what's going on? But yeah, putting a horse on a treadmill, fair play.
You're right though. Everything in this film though, there's no long-term setup and payoff.
Yeah, it's like everything, the glaive. When they introduced the glaive, you'd think the glaive would do. Is it the glaive or the clave? Glaive with a G.
Like
the way that the kind of the Obi-Wan guy kind of brings it up, it's just so flippant. It's like, oh, of course you need the glaive, and it's like, well, what?
You need the glaive. Go get the glaive.
But the glaive's just a story. No, actually, it's real. If you just walk up there...
Just walk up the hill.
It's
next
just
door.
there.
They milk that... When he's climbing up that mountain, they milk that scene so much. And you can clearly tell it's a stunt performer. It's about 5 minutes long. I'm like, Jesus Christ, hurry up.
Yeah, and it's meant to be like representing some sort of arduous journey, but it's like, so wait. Let me be clear about what's going on here. You set up a MacGuffin that you need to go on an arduous journey to reclaim, so you can go and so you can go and save the princess, which will also be an arduous journey through but then also he can't use the glaive until he gets to the princess at the end anyway. Yeah. So like as far I'm sorry, but like, as far as like storytelling goes, it's such nonsense. It's like, why didn't the old guy just have the glaive? Yeah. Why didn't he go and deliver why wasn't the glaive like a thing, you know, with the king's necklace that he takes off?
Yeah.
That's in the shape of the glaive.
The glaive, yeah. That wasn't.
You know what I mean? It's like, why can't he like unlock this secret and say something like, it's like, oh, I came to find a king, but only a boy, and only the king can unlock the power of the glaive, which is what you need. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it feels like the solution is so obvious.
Why he wasn't just using it through the film and then, shitly, and then at the end he realised, this is the real way to use it. And I was so annoyed when he actually uses it at the end, and it just drives it itself. He doesn't do anything. It's he's there like looking like he's concentrating on it with his little hand out. But this actually segues into another point that I have, which from my little nerdy brain, and I think a lot of it is because the movie just doesn't really connect to itself. Like there's no real through line other than the fact that they're traveling somewhere, right? Like there's no, and where are they going to begin with? Anyway,
because they don't know where the castle is, do they? This ship, because it's
so where are they going? Were they always going? Yeah. Were they always going to the Spider Lady?
Well, obviously no. They're going to the Spider Lady, and they're going to not Crimson, the Emerald. The sea guy.
Oh, the sea guy, yeah. But again, that's like two things that are just totally... Anyway, whatever. But like, so there's no kind of through line. And I was thinking about it, and I made a little joke to myself about how like he unlocks the glaive skill towards the end, you know what I mean? It's like he levels up and like now he can use his new ability. But then when he loses the glaive, I'm like, ooh, that's bad GMing, that is, because you've given the player characters something and then taken it away from them, and player characters don't like that. But then I was like, maybe it's like in a video game when you get like a special ability for a specific boss fight and it's meant to be just like a fun extra thing. But then immediately afterwards he unlocks his new skill, which is the fire the flame powers, so I think like the whole thing to me, I was just like
that bit was set up a bit earlier on.
Sure, but the whole thing to me was like,
wasn't it both of them using the firepower? Why did she just
Yeah,
have to
well,
stand by
that's-
and watch
that's a
him
good-
use it?
That is a good question. The answer is sexism.
Yeah,
But like
exactly.
but the whole thing to me, it almost felt like it was constructed like a D&D campaign.
Yeah, I think
You know
this is
what I
why
mean?
people did link it originally as well.
Yeah.
Because it is that just
It
kind
could
of
be,
like
could be.
location.
But then I don't think that's based on anything to do with like the setting or anything. I think it's just the rhythm of the
rhythm
story.
of it, yeah.
feels like an almost like session based thing where it's like you have this overarching goal, but then actually them getting to the end bit feels like such an arbitrary point in the story, you know, and they've just gone on these like mini adventures.
Yeah, it's there. Get on the horses and you get there. Like, because we
exactly, and it's like and that's why it's so like weirdly paced, because the GM didn't have anything planned for like the climb up the mountain to get the glaive or anything. So it's just like unlocked, but they're like, oh shit, they've got this magic weapon, but you can't use it yet because you're not high enough level, or what, you know what I mean? Like it's just so much of it feels like
they treat
weird.
it like it's, you know, the sword and the stone, which, you know, is a massive. It's the massive setup of that storyline. You think in the setup of the film, it would have been mention the glaive and kind of really be brought up and like built up and stuff. But it's just it's nothing. And I've seen so many people say
because it's
one of the
backwards,
best sci-fi fantasy weapons, and I'm sorry, it's rubbish. It's like a little squid thing with blades that pop out, and it does bugger all.
It gets points for originality, and they frame it really nicely when he uses it.
I think any normal screenplay would have been like this. There's this epic weapon you need to defeat the beast. It's been told in our tales for years. Let's go on a venture to get the weapon, and when we got it, we could fight the beast. I think that's like what it felt like it was going to be, and then they just introduced the weapon. But but you introduce the weapon, but actually just keep it on your belt for the entire time. Don't touch it because you can't use it yet.
Symbolism
it felt so nullifying.
Have the symbolism of the glaive throughout the film, like it's in like structures and things like that. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like part of the world. Like, to be honest, you see nothing of this world. You see one castle that's surrounded by nothing, and it's like a tiny little castle because it's like a forced perspective shot that doesn't quite work.
I did ask this,
and
I've got a question.
There's nothing else around
kind of sci-fi.
at all.
This kind of sci-fi medievalism
no
is
one
weird
exists.
to me. When you're like, so what are they? They're kings of the planet. Well, there were two kingdoms of the whole planet. Is that what it is? Who are they ruling?
They lost 300 men on the way.
To what? Like, why aren't they in a city?
Yeah.
Why are they just? What, do they rule over this wasteland? Is that their kingdom? Like, why is the beast here? Like, what's to gain for him at this planet? Like, it's
like the people they meet. Like, one of them arrives as a fireball. Some of them are escaped prisoners from somewhere. So I guess there's I guess a prison exists.
I guess
there's a castle. There's a castle and a prison, and nothing else.
And that, remember, because he releases the guy from EastEnders and his little cuffs. Todd Carty, is it? And he goes, but only the king or the High Warden would have those keys or something. Like, what? Like, there's only two people in the world that can unlock prisons.
It just seems impractical. Like.
It seems impractical. How small's the planet? Maybe the planet's tiny. Maybe that's what I'm missing.
Yeah.
You know how it can't be that tiny because they have to use the fire horses to travel thousands of miles. So
fire mares.
So.
Population
going back to the whole D&D
thing, whole planet.
You know, going back to the whole D&D campaign thing, it feels like, you know, the Cyclops, and he has to, where they, you know, when they capture the fire mares, he says, I must remain here, and they all kind of suggest that he's going to die there. It feels like the one guy playing the D&D campaign who has to go home for tea, so they're like, no, we'll kill you off now. But he finishes his tea quickly, and he's like, I'm coming back to play now. Can you write me back in?
I don't understand how those beats made it through the screenplay. I'm very honest without that. Like, I don't understand how it made it through the screenplay. When you introduce this character, and I think it's kind of cool actually, when you say like the mysticism behind the Cyclops, when they're saying they gave up an eye to the beast and they can now see the future, but the only future they can see is their own death. I was like, fine, okay, that I can live with that. That works. And so you have this like idea that these Cyclopses are kind of morose because they know when they're going to die. Although I don't particularly buy that. I think if you knew when you're going to die, you'd be a bit more wild, frankly. But he then like makes the big proclamation at the Fire Horses that he has to remain here because this is fate, to remain here. Yet they're not showing any threat to him. There's not like an army attacking the area they're in. There's not like something he has to take a stand against. There's displayed on screen no reason for him to stay behind, apart from he's just saying, I need to stay behind, and they give a big emotional goodbye. And then not 2 minutes later of film is he racing back in as like a triumphant savior. And I cannot understand why there was no beats to this and no one went, how about not having him stay behind and just having him
weird. You feel
sacrifice himself at the point of sacrificing himself in the film?
Well, yeah, I mean, surely that was the original idea, right? Like, surely he's in this doorway, and they're saying to him, come on, and he goes,
like, no,
and he goes like, no,
yeah.
he's like, no, this is my time, and he like
fate,
turns to go and fight the Slayers that are like coming in. Like, surely that was it. Apart from, oh my god, the guy with the fucking parkour roll out of the doorway, and then it takes him like 5 seconds to stand up and run up. I love it so much. It's so good. But like, surely that was what it was.
That's I couldn't
like
work it out.
It must have been. But they did set it up. There is a setup in the movie. To be fair, there's a setup. The idea that like if they don't just go along with it and accept their fate, it's somehow like super painful. So I think like maybe the idea was meant to be if he just stayed, he would have like just passed away peacefully. But because he went to help, he had this like horrifying like squish death thing. Maybe that was the idea, but I don't know. They definitely didn't sell it very well.
Against, if there was like an army approaching him or something like that, and he was like, "No, go! I need to stay here. It's my fate." But then miraculously, he still comes back later on. That's 2 story beats for him just to go, "No, I need to stay here in this valley." Like with the horses.
I mean, there's definitely like there is a version of this that works, right? Sure. Like there is something, because at the core of it, because he keeps saying like it's man's fate, you know, like or whatever. Like you just have to accept your fate. Like that's his whole kind of shtick and everything. And like the whole film's about like this prophecy and stuff, right? So you kind of have to accept like the idea of fate going in. But then, and also, like, the reason he has this fate is because of, like, the beast tricking his people and everything. So his return is him defying the beast, right? That's him
defying his kind
directly fighting back against the idea that this beast is actually, like, all-powerful and can just do what it wants or whatever. And he's like, no. So I think that like there's a version of this that works, but obviously it doesn't really land. I feel like we're ragging on this movie quite a lot, but it's easy to pick apart and it's easy to make fun of. But there are like there's always a reason with these films why they persist,
why they persist,
and why like a lot of people have a lot of why people have a lot of affection for it. And I think with this one, like we've talked about a few of them already, but there's definitely moments and scenes and images and ideas in this movie that work really well, a lot of them in total isolation from everything else, but the whole of it as a whole, and they're consistent throughout the movie. Like it's not just like one thing and then everything else is garbage. Like there's consistent moments in this film that are super memorable, but then the whole of it is actually less than the sum of its parts. Which I think is, to me, in a lot of ways, like I think when a movie works really well is when all the different parts of the movie come together to make it about something, you know, it can be quite a simple thing. It can just be telling a good story. But when it has a purpose that is fulfilled and is like well done, I think that's when you get a really great movie. I'm sure I'm saying like super basic things about film now, but I'm just making the point that like this movie is almost the opposite of that.
It really
where
is.
all of the individual moments are not in service of anything else.
No. They're not in service of anything though. That's the thing. They just kind of exist to being the film.
Perfect example of this is the scene with the spider lady.
Yeah. It's really long, isn't it, as well? It just kind of stops dead almost. Even though it's an interesting scene in itself, it just feels way too long for the film.
Yeah, and it's really funny because the guy Obi-Wan's like, "You guys stay here. I'm gonna go talk to Spider Lady," and then he goes to talk to Spider Lady, and it's like, "Oh, and I could talk to her because I know her name from ages ago." And then the big reveal is like, "Oh, she was the woman that I talked about, who I loved, and that was something that I mentioned earlier. So at least that's a callback." But then he gets and he's chatting to her, and she's like, "You have a son," and he's like, "I have a son," and she's like, "I killed him." It's like, "You killed him?" And she was like, "I'm sure you can't forgive me." And he's like, "I forgive you." It's just the best. I love it so much.
She turns to dust or whatever, and so is that like his timer then? Oh no, it's not Sheeta.
Yeah. He has to carry the sand. Yeah, because it's the sand that's protecting her from the spider. I think is the idea.
Yeah. So basically, the idea is that she did something so horrific that she got put in this jail that was protected by these crystal spiders, and if she ever left, they would kill her. But but the sand that's in her little cocoon area is what's protecting her from the spiders. Yeah. I was under the impression she was in charge of the spiders, so it wasn't until later that I found out that that's wrong. But
it's like a self-imposed exile thing where it's like.
But the spiders are really cool. Talking about that, really good stop motion animation. I thought they were really creaky. I thought that set creepy. I thought that set was really like well done. It was funny enough. It was the first thing they shot, which I can't imagine that was easy at all. And. Her, the actress, she was in her 30s, and because they need to make her look old, she had 23 prosthetic pieces like applied to her. Apparently, it took her 6 hours to the point of like
I believe
she hated it so much that she became basically just like grumpier and grumpier as the process went on, and just moodier and moodier. And so she was absolutely in method by the time she had to sit there and say these lines about killing her son and things.
I bet, yeah.
It's just this film seems to represent to me just so much effort for so little payoff for things like that. Like,
it's like they introduced
the swamp
the seer.
Set. I think
they introduced the seer only to kill him off the next scene, and he was like one of the most interesting characters they introduced.
Yeah. I mean, it's another example of exactly the same thing, though, right? Like, they go to this place, and like it's quite interesting. Like, there's these emeralds which were a thing apparently, but then the emeralds turn to rocks, and like. There's the big like explosion thing, and that's another moment like when the thing explodes and like there's the wind and like the beast appears. Like the special effect of the hand is like a little bit dated, but like that moment really lands, I think, like as this kind of shocking idea of like the sort of range of power of the enemy is like, you know, it can kind of reach out and interfere with them at any moment. Like I think all of that works, but you're absolutely right. It's just totally undercut. Immediately. And it's another thing where like the kid could have just been the seer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Totally. Like there's no reason why they couldn't have turned up, and it could have just been a little kid.
Yeah.
And Ergo could have been like, what are you doing here, little kid? We're here to see the seer or whatever. And I don't know, maybe that would be too much like the Yoda reveal from Empire, and maybe that's why they didn't do it that way. But yeah, it's all of these like little things where it's like they tried to do so much more than they had to, and in trying to do more, like they end up doing less in the overall.
Ergo's such a good example of that, and they clearly are playing this kind of like connection between him and the kid, that they have a close connection, and Ergo really wants to protect him, and they form a really tight like little pairing or whatever, but they don't do or show enough or kind of use that enough for that to really land at all. And especially like at the end when Ergo's a tiger, and I was like, they've got a tiger running around a hall with this kid. I hope the kid's fine.
In all fairness, I was watching the making of. They drugged the tiger. So yeah.
Oh no,
that happened.
Sure. Yeah.
Nothing is given to any of these actors to do anything with, so you don't get invested in these characters. Like Robbie Coltrane, originally in the script, had no lines, and he had to ask the directors, like, "I'm only going to do this film if I have a line." And like his line is even dubbed, and he's dubbed by the guy who plays Boone.
Yeah, they dubbed
Michael Elphick.
We do. Need
even
to talk
the main
about
actress
because,
is dubbed as well.
Yeah,
like they wouldn't even let her.
Lisette Anthony plays like yeah, Alyssa Anthony plays the princess in this, which I'll talk about in a second. But basically, like the Colombian president, Frank Pierce, deciding that an English accent wouldn't sell, so it has to be dubbed by an American. So just got Lindsay Krause to dub every single line of this film, and it's distracting to a point of like an unwatchability. I think when one watch.
Do you know what's funny about that story?
It was just so distracting.
Do you know what's funny about that story? So the producer who decided to dub her became her father-in-law, and I bet that was an awkward conversation later on down the road.
I should say about Alyssa Anthony, to be serious for 2 seconds. She was one of the people who spoke out against Harvey Weinstein originally, very, very publicly. She was one of the first actresses actually to go on record about him, and spoke quite candidly about how he was in the 80s during the time period she was shooting this actually, and spoke quite candidly about like his kind of abuse and stuff. And it's all on, it's all on record. She was on Channel 4 News and stuff like that. So if you search her name, all that stuff's going to come up about her really now. But I just
fair play.
Absolutely, like the videos of her talking are so strong and impressive, really. And so it was kind of like a weird thing watching this, going, "Oh, that's who it was." Like that's who this actress was, and still is. So I thought that was quite powerful, really.
Yeah, I mean, what a brave thing to do, like especially at that time, and
because she was really young when she made this film. Yes. She was like 17,
super young.
Straight out of school.
Really?
Yeah. Apparently, the director, he said he wanted a young lady to play the part, the very young lady. So I don't know. That screams old Hollywood to me.
Okay, here's a question, since we're talking about creepy misogynists. So
80s films producers.
So watching this movie, I haven't seen it for a long time. But watching this movie, there's a moment like she's talking to her dad, and he's saying, "Oh, they're our ancient enemy. We can't have this." Blah, yada yada yada. And then the prince turns up, and they have the prince and the princess. They have this moment where they look at each other, and then she kind of goes behind a pillar and like makes this face like she's happy to see him. And then it's like, okay, so we're doing like a star-crossed lovers thing, and the idea is like everything in the world is trying to keep them apart, but they're just desperate to be together, and that's the whole deal. Like that's what this prophecy is about. All this kind of stuff. So I was watching it with that in mind, and then it kind of became apparent to me that they hadn't met. Yeah. Is that right?
I think so. I think
they'd never actually met.
Yeah.
And then an hour later, the prince is like, "But do you love me though?" And she's like, "Of course I love you." And it's like, why? What happened? Like, okay, so she says like, "Oh, I chose well," and he's like, "So did I." But other than that, like, he just does the creepy coming round the pillar like he's gonna attack her kind of thing. Like that's his opening move.
Yeah,
and then
her dad's like,
and then later on in the film.
And that's
later on in the film, when the Beast is talking to the princess about how he'll like betray her and stuff, and he's sent this other changeling to like seduce him and whatever, and then the changeling says, I was meant to kill you. I could have done it, but in the hour that I knew you, I loved you." And it's like, wow, the only interaction we've seen as the two of you is you go, "Do you want some food?" And he goes, "I'm not hungry." And she goes, "Oh, go on, do it for me." And he goes, "All right then."
My favourite thing about that is though, when they're in that
she loved him.
They're in the evil layer, and the evil version of him is talking to the princess, and there's like a video screen of them floating, and he like casts it aside, and it's just so badly like animated. It just it's so cringeworthy. But like, there's no hero's journey for the main guy whatsoever.
Absolutely love it.
He's like, he's just great from the beginning.
Yeah.
There's like nothing. Like, at least with Luke Skywalker,
no love
he starts
story
off as this like, at least Luke Skywalker, you see him become the hero over. I mean, I know you got 3 films to see him become that hero, but he does become a hero at the end of the first film. But like,
in the first one, he absolutely does. Like it's a classic. Like, yes, it's a chosen one narrative, but it's still like a hero's journey. Like he still goes from like humble beginnings, and he feels like he was meant for more, and then it turns out that that's true, and then he has his mentor, which kind of guides him in this. It's like the guy's already a prince.
Yeah,
he's already about to become king of the world.
Yeah. He's
like
already
at the start of this movie,
fabulous military
and he's
leader.
and he's already meant to be this like amazing warrior.
Yep.
Yeah, like so he's already, and it's like
it's boring.
I guess it's like I guess the point is he has everything taken away from him. I guess that's the point.
Yeah.
And he's crying on the stairs for like a minute because his dad died and the girl that he was gonna bang isn't there anymore. Like
the prophecy they set the whole film up as well isn't about these two characters. It's about their kid. So it's like the prophecy is like a woman with an old name will have a child that will rule the universe. So when they repeat that at the end of the thing, I'm like, what warlord is their kid? Like, what story is that? Like the person who rules the universe isn't a hero. That's like...
Okay, what if their kid is the Beast? Played by Benedict Cumberbatch in a flashback of when Doctor Strange was looking at the 14 million
because the Beast is trying to marry her throughout the whole film. So that gets more kind
maybe it's like a reverse Back to the Future situation. We don't know. Could be.
What do you think the look of the Beast?
I loved it. Like they were like
the look of the Beast. I think it's fine. I think they do. You know,
they don't show it. They think it's quite explicitly the guy who designed it, quite a famous like special effects supervisor. He was so annoyed about the fact that he spent so long making this ridiculous costume, which took like I think it had like 24 different controls in it. Like it was an animatronic thing.
Oh wow.
And it had one person in it. So Nick Maley, the guy who designed this, he was so annoyed that they lit it so badly and didn't show his creation that he never let anything else he designed get shown by something he hadn't directed. So he would always take over the direction and production of all his stuff because he was so annoyed with his film that he spent his masterpiece. They just didn't light it properly, and he didn't get to see it on screen.
I didn't know if they filmed it in a way that he wasn't technically there because the castle whatever's constantly moving, that he's like not in our realm or whatever, so he's constantly kind of, I don't know, because they film it in such a kind of weird way. It's like just flashes.
It's a very video game showdown at the end. It's a very like I'm far away shooting beams at you and.
Well, the video game that Paul
sent it's a real boss fight.
Pretty much that.
I think you'll find I sent it. But,
I'm sorry, you sent it.
It's amazing. It's definitely
the fight in the video game is better than the fight in the film because you actually have to throw the glaive in the video game to keep saving people and to attack the Beast. But in the film, you don't.
You know what's weird? I feel like so in the fight, right? He throws the glaive and it makes the Beast's arm bleed a bit. And then there's like about 30 seconds where they're both just looking at the glaive and nothing is happening. Yes. And then the glaive kills the Beast, maybe under the control of the prince, maybe it just doing its own thing. But then I feel like the sequence of him then trying to get the glaive to return to him is then as long as the fight.
Yeah,
it's really long.
And then he goes
like as if this glaive is like somehow intrinsic to his person, and he's like totally lost without it or something.
I got that out of a volcano. Yeah. I want that. Like,
I love the reaction shot of the princess watching him trying to get it returned because she hasn't got a clue what's going on. So he's just standing there with his hand over it and she's looking at him like, "Are you alright? Is something meant to happen?" And he's there like, "I swear this has never happened before."
Oh, they had to shoot it.
Which reminds me, another brilliant moment.
They had to shoot it all in reverse, and apparently she didn't understand what was going on. So probably the look of bemusement is probably real.
I did say one of my first notes watching this is none of these actors have a clue what's going on, and I think that holds true. I think that holds true throughout, especially the moment in like the wedding scene at the beginning where it's played like it's a ceremony. Sure. They're all there. Everyone. It's played like it's clear from the kind of the context that the wedding is happening, but then they've obviously created this like original ceremony and it ties into unlocking the fireball skill at the end. But he goes, "Okay, I give fire to water and blah blah blah," and then she like scoops the fire out of the thing. But then everyone looks as if this is some bizarre thing that they weren't expecting to happen.
Yeah.
Or they all like express mild surprise, and it's like, is this not written down somewhere? Yeah. Are they just like are they just ad-libbing this? Like, did they write their own vows and they're doing the fire water trick as like a special
I do like that
thing?
effect,
Like,
though.
what's going on?
That effect was actually in camera, so when you see the flames on their hands, it's all done by mirrors and that. So it's actually, like how they do on theatre and stuff like that. It was actually
Okay.
it was actually like live on set, and I thought that's
Sure,
pretty
yeah.
good. Because there's some ropey rotoscoping later on and stuff with like fire in hands and stuff like that. But that one was pretty cool.
But I think it's another thing that says so much about this movie. Just the way that the actors react to that moment is like.
Is this special in the universe, or is this like?
Yeah,
what
is
happens
this
in this
is this a
universe?
normal
Yeah.
is this a
It's
normal
impossible
marriage
to know.
thing? Like, is it usually like metaphorical, but in this case it actually manifested, and that's why the surprise? But then there's only like mild surprise. It's not like anyone goes, "Oh my god, like she's a witch," like no one fully reacts to it, but they react as if it's something that is strange.
They're
that's
definitely getting
happening.
told to
building's
react,
really
but I'm not sure
bad.
they're getting told how.
Yeah,
to react.
like they're making a choice, and surely these are like old actors as well. Like, surely they've asked, you know what I mean? Surely they've asked, like, so like, how would I react?
Actually, David Yates made them do a table read of the entire script before shooting, which never happened on
I
film.
wish
that was a TV
I wish
thing.
I could have been there.
Can you
I wish I
imagine
could have
having
been
to
there
sit
for
on a
that.
table and read this? Like, it's that would have been so bad.
It's in the making of. It's in the making of. You see them reading it.
The Fire Mares. I love it. Oh god, is it the whole thing? I would watch the
it's not
whole
the
table
thing,
read for
sadly,
this.
no. But it's
Oh,
throughout
well.
a lot of the film. There's not a great deal of dialogue. There's not a lot of interaction between people talking back and forth. I don't think
There isn't.
Like it's like Liam Neeson probably has about 3
That's
lines.
true,
Robbie
yeah.
Coltrane has 1 line. Todd Carty has like 2 lines. It's like, they're really underutilized.
We have buried the fact that Liam Neeson is in this film. We need to talk about Liam Neeson is in this film. Like,
I want to mention Robbie Coltrane first, though.
Go on.
Of his, like, he has more than 1 line, and I know that because he has a line when he dies as well.
He does
which
have a
is
line when he
the most unearned character arc possibly in cinematic history, where he starts off being the guy who's like, "Are we getting paid for this?"
Yeah.
And then nothing happens, and then at the end he's like, "The journey was worth it." And it's like, why? Because you got to ride on a fire horse. Like, what? Like, you watched your friends die. Like, nothing. What's worth it?
He
like,
just wanted to be outside,
Anyway.
like seeing other
yeah,
things.
he was just sick of that.
I thought the same
weird
thing about the
little
guy who dies in the
cave
swamp.
place.
Like, and it was meant to be like really dramatic.
Yeah.
This guy dies, and I was like, I have no idea who you are. I've never seen your
Yeah,
face
it's
in this
like-
film before. You've
It's
never
like
had a line.
his first close up in the movie. His first like solo shot in the
That
whole
stuff
film.
is floating on
It's
the
just
water.
similar.
It's just cork, like corkscrew cork. It's just loads of that shredded up. I can imagine that was just horrible.
It looks
to
like
watch.
that.
Yeah, isn't. Oh, God,
Again,
yeah,
so
definitely.
much effort.
That was on the Bond set, and it was like it was so big they couldn't heat it. So apparently everyone just got really ill from being cold and damp and wet the whole time.
Oh God.
Again, everything in this
What
film
a
is so much
miserable-
effort and doesn't pay off. Like, I can't imagine how hard it was to make this stuff. Like I know David Yates was annoyed because he thought it was going to be just loads of location shooting, and it wasn't. It was just these huge sets that like were unmanageable to him, and they couldn't populate it with enough people to fill them. So these empty huge sets that kind of looked cheap because things look cheap on camera unless you kind of like, in case you can kind of use the same kind of stuff on them. It's
Yeah, totally. There's definitely a couple of moments though, like the shot of them bringing the princess to the castle, like past, and they kind of make it look as if there's like a big crowd of like slayers and stuff. That moment like is really effective, I think, comparatively to like a lot of things, because it's hard faking big crowd scenes, right? Like that's just a difficult thing to do, and like it's dark and they cheat it and everything, but still like. I think it ties into one of the first thing I said, like the moments that are meant to be those kind of scary moments that rely on that visual design, I think more often than not are actually effective. But then there's just what lets it down, and I think it comes back to what we were just saying about like no one really talks to each other, is there's no emotional core to this movie at all.
No, there isn't.
Like
there isn't at all.
there's no like relationship or anything. I guess the main one is like you have the prince and the old guy, which I guess is it's like that kind of Arthur and Merlin.
Yeah, it is, absolutely.
You know, Luke and Obi-Wan kind of thing. But it's just like, I was watching it and I was just thinking, like, imagine if they didn't get Alec Guinness for Star Wars and it was this guy.
As
Obi-Wan.
Was it Trevor Martin? No,
like,
it wasn't.
No,
because you know, like Star Wars when they filmed A New Hope, when they filmed like A New Hope, that wasn't like, you know, that wasn't like a big deal or anything, was it? Like, they could have very easily just not been able to get anyone.
Oh yeah,
good.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
And instead of Alec Guinness, it could have been this fucking
any old English actor. I thought
and maybe he's in a bunch of other stuff, and maybe he's done some good things. But like this movie, like this performance is just, he makes so many choices
like
that I don't understand why. Like
nothing against David Batley, who like in at all. Like I'm sure David Batley was a great guy, but his performance in this as Ergo, Magnificent, was for me. It was like one of those characters in Nightmare that you meet. Who like
right? Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Or like Maid Marian and Merry Men or something.
Yeah. Who gives you like a challenge?
He has his moments though where he flips from like you know those like historical walk-through ghost show things like tourist traps in London. He like flips from that to like the full like Shakespearean comedy character in the tragedy, like the gatekeeper Shakespearean character. And I think that like that's a thing that happens in this movie. Like sometimes they think they're on this fun fantasy sci-fi romp, and sometimes they think they're doing this really serious, like dramatic, almost classical theatre kind of presentation. And I don't, maybe that's you know,
probably a result of getting a lot of British
to do with the director.
So you know, that's probably where that comes
from.
Yeah,
I guess.
And like, you know,
and I mean, it was probably their background, a lot of them, wasn't it? As opposed to Harrison Ford, who was like making tables and stuff.
But like, you've got Ken Marshall as the lead, and he's just like, he's got nothing to him. Like, I know he went to Juilliard or whatever, so he learned alongside like Robin Williams and Christopher Reeves and I don't know, some other great actors at the time. But like, you compare him to like Harrison Ford or even Mark Hamill, like he's got nothing to him. He's just kind of
The problem with Ken Marshall, and Ken Marshall is great in DS9. So any Star Trek like fan knows him in DS9.
You're going to bring up Star Trek, but yes.
But like,
wait, who is he in DS9?
In DS9 he plays the guy who becomes the lead of the Marquis. He plays a Star Trek commander, Michael Eddington, and then abandons them for like the Marquis. He's really good in he's like 10 episodes or something like that. 9 episodes, I think. But
I don't
the
think
problem
he's
with
bad.
him is that in this film is Liam Neeson, who is one of the more charismatic kind of leads you could have got in a film. And like, what casting agent had Liam Neeson on set and went Ken Marshall? Like that, and even in this little,
I mean, Liam Neeson's
film,
performance in this movie is very poor.
It's
like, let's not.
He's
not good. Like he's not taken Liam Neeson at this point, is he? It's like this is my third movie and I'm excited to have a couple of lines, Liam Neeson, you know, like this, that's what we're dealing with. But I think like I look at this, one of my favorite films ever is The Princess Bride, and I think about the lead guy, who you'll tell me his name, the lead guy in The Princess Bride.
Carrie Ells.
Is playing... And like, there's overlap there, right? Because he's meant to be this kind of Errol Flynn character. And obviously it's much more kind of tongue-in-cheek in The Princess Bride. Yeah. But in that movie, there's emotional resonance. Even though you have this very, like...
As you...
very scene. Well, you have these scenes, right? Like, even as he's introduced, you have these moments where he basically goes and interacts with a character, and then he interacts with another character, and then he interacts with another character. Yeah. So it's not. You could argue that in that movie, like, it's like episodic at the beginning, and then it does tie together like later on, obviously. But then but what sells him as a character is the way that he interacts with these other characters that are just so full of personality.
Yeah.
And have things to say for themselves.
Yeah.
And then it also allows him to demonstrate his kind of mastery and competence and everything you know?
Yeah.
And in this one, it's like, okay, so he plays opposite this Ergo character, who's a very larger-than-life character, who, like, comes in as a fireball, turns himself into a goose, and what does he do?
Loads of things.
Like, he just he laughs as if he's trying...
He just
yeah,
smirks,
it's like, he always laughs as if he's trying to think of something clever to say, but he can't. so he just tries to do this aloof laugh, and then... But then he doesn't, like, there's no back and forth whatsoever. He's just there. He's just there while things are happening.
They basically look at the screen.
And it's like,
even as like, character. Look at this character. Look at him.
And then you have, like, but then in The Princess Bride, you have, like, hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. And he tells him this whole story. And it's this, like, huge character. But then they have this back and forth sword fight in which you then learn about both characters through that action sequence because of the setup of the Inigo Montoya character and then how he kind of relates to that. So you don't just get told, oh yeah, he's this great warrior who in the first fight scene just gets murked like immediately. And then he cries and then he cries on the stairs and then he goes on a hike. And he puts his hand in some lava because, like, he's the chosen one, apparently, and only the chosen one can do that, but we've just been told this 5 minutes ago. Like, it's just totally, like, it's all so unearned, you know? Yeah. And The Princess Bride is a silly film. Like, it's not, like, it's played straight, but it's not, it doesn't take itself seriously, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's my little rant about
I kind of think
character
the whole
building
space aspect of this film is just totally pointless as well. I just don't think it really...
It is pointless. I agree.
It just doesn't add to it. Like, I don't know. Like, I guess they've got lasers at the ends of their
spears or something.
Yeah. But, like...
That's it. Yeah. That's the... And I have to say, I loved the way, like, when the Slayers were killed, they kind of melt into...
that weird thing comes out their skull and kind of slides out.
Yeah. I was like, when that happened right at the beginning, I was like, that's cool. Yeah, okay, that's cool. I wonder what this will be.
Yeah, it's the creepy, scary moments that, like, really stand out. But I think the sci-fi stuff, I think, is kind of there because they wanted to have lasers in it. Yeah. I think they wanted to distance themselves from pure fantasy because that wasn't popular at the time. What was popular was the more kind of, like, sci-fi stuff, like, off the back of Star Wars and everything, obviously. But then, so they gave it this, like, sci-fi fantasy design, which plays into what I guess they thought their strengths were as, like, the Errol Flynn kind of thing. And then they wanted to do, like, a kind of swashbuckling thing. But, like, of course, Star Wars has, like, kind of dueling in it, but it's certainly not, like, a swashbuckler film. Like, it's obviously borrows a lot more from, like, kind of samurai stuff.
I think you had
and a lot less...
in the film pulling it in those different directions. I think you had people who were pulling it into, I want this to be swashbuckling, and kind of then younger voices in it who are pulling it towards like the kind of fantasy design and the special effects design and stuff like that. And I think, like, I mean, the special effects supervisor did leave the film before production because of like because of arguments, and they had to bring in like the guy from like Empire. But like, I think that plays out on the screen that it is a fight between like different people to concentrate on different elements of this, and it means they don't quite concentrate on any of them as much as they need to. Like they're all someone's there like I'm not doing it if there's not a giant spider. What's that Kevin Smith story about the producer that was obsessed with the giant spider, the fight with the giant spider? Anyway, I meant to talk about this before when we were talking about Spider Lady, but the magic of cinema, right? Like, I am not a filmmaker. I don't know how to do that, right? But I love one thing I did notice during this is you have the guy crawling on like the webs and stuff. So you have established that there's a giant web in this area, and then it cuts to a shot of the spider coming out, and there's dramatic music, and it cuts back to the actor, and he looks really scared. But there's nothing to denote the actual size.
Yes, that's true.
No, there's nothing to denote the size of the spider. Like, nothing tells you this is a giant spider. Yeah. Like, there's no point of reference in terms of scale, but you just know that it is because of the way that it's shot, because of the musical cues. Like, no one's gonna watch this and be like, I wonder how big that spider is.
Tiny spider.
You know, or like, I was like, why is he so scared of that tiny spider? Like, no one's thinking that.
You just see this tiny little spider on the web, and it's just like him in full. Yeah, and he just flicks it off.
Yeah, it's just like
flicks it away.
Yeah, that definitely in the Spaceballs version of Krull, like that would definitely happen. But like, I think that shows that the people who are working on this, like, they know what they're doing, right? Like,
oh yeah, definitely.
It's not that like, and I find that so fascinating about this film that like these people were like experienced, professional. There was a good budget. You know, it was a good time for this. Well, I mean, apart from like obviously the release 3 weeks after Return of the Jedi, which was, you know, obviously not
I have to correct myself
ideal.
When we talk about
but in terms of like the general landscape of what the cinema going public were probably looking for at the time, like it was good timing. So they had all of this stuff going for them, but for some reason, the engine just never quite turned over. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's just this constant like. It's trying, you know, it's trying and it's doing stuff and it's got like so many ideas and so much potential, but it just never quite gets there. And I just love the purely intellectual exercise of looking at it and being like, okay, what were they trying to do and why didn't it work?
Yeah.
Like what were the reasons why, like, and I think there's a huge part of it, what you were saying about it just being pulled in so many directions and people obviously like wanting it to be slightly different things to the point where people were quitting, people were going on holiday. It took like way longer than it should have to make like all these things. And it just makes you wonder, like,
it makes you wonder.
It just makes you wonder, like, what could it have been?
The faith in this film for the production budget, like 30 million, I think it was in like 1983, is insane.
Yeah,
bearing in mind,
and now I look at it and going back
million,
to
like that was their like
sure,
comparison with that, and this box office for this was 16 million, and box office for Princess Bride was 30 million. So there's a nice little direct swap of that, of those two stats with that.
And it's going back to one of my first things I said though, and to totally contradict myself. I feel like we're at this point now where I start becoming a hypocrite. I pull back the curtain and reveal what I thought all along. I started by saying you've got to think about this film with the background of Return of the Jedi and how it shows that Return of the Jedi was like so far ahead of everything else. But the thing is, at the time, like, Return of the Jedi wasn't this huge. Well, I mean, by the third film, obviously it was like a huge deal, but not like how we would look at it now. Star Wars is obviously so influential in cinema, like just so outsized influential in anything like sci-fi, action, family films, you know, coming of age stories, like all of these things that it just like it created the expectations for a whole generation of people going to the cinema who are now the people making the films, you know? So when you go back to that 1983 scenario, it's like, yes, a lot of Krull seems very dated, but that's probably just because those are the elements of these films that Star Wars didn't do. And there are even moments of that. Like, there is a swinging from the chandelier moment in A New Hope, where Luke grabs Princess Leia and they swing across the thing for no reason. Like, why does that happen? You know? It's just there because that was like an expectation of like cinema goers for like, that was an action thing that you can do was swinging across the thing, but like we let it go because, you know, there's so many other things that it does so much. I mean, like, you know, one of the things I love saying about Star Wars is like there's only ever one person who's made a Star Wars movie who actually understands Star Wars, and that's Rian Johnson or Ryan Johnson. I always forget how you meant to pronounce it, but
well, I'd agree
but
with that.
Then, and I think that's a big part of it because, you know, when they were making that first movie, they were just using all the same like cultural touchstones as Krull was, but it's just in Krull it feels dated because Krull isn't like this.
I think one of the differences you have as well with Star Wars was people scrappily trying to make a film, and I think sometimes that really helps people to make a film when you're absolutely just trying to push for it. And what you see with Krull is the exact opposite. This is an absolute monolith of a studio blockbuster with millions of pounds thrown at it, deciding that this is going to be a hit and this is going to play to these audiences and this is going to do this. And that never plays out very well for films. I mean, the Marvel things might have twitched that a little bit, but even so, like most of the time when you're deciding what your audience will like and deciding you're going to put out these elements of other successful properties, that's not how kind of creatively you make something in that kind of most, like, I don't know, cynical way, really. And it does feel like in this they're deciding they can nail this, because look, it's easy to make a Star Wars. You just need a princess and a hero and a weapon. And everything else.
I've just I've just found this post-it, and all that's written on it is the Warner Brothers DC Cinematic Universe. I'm sorry, I don't know what I was doing there. I'll just throw it in the bin. Sorry to drop that in completely apropos of nothing.
And that's what weird thing is. The big part of it, like that I found crazy in the research of this was like the merchandise for this film was absolutely insane. Like they decided they were going to sell you this film on merchandising, and there's we talked about the Atari game, which I think this is the first film we've covered that has a computer game made for it. I don't think another film actually did that. They had an arcade.
When was E.T.?
game.
E.T. would have been after this, wouldn't it?
E.T. was before this, the year before.
The E.T. game is very famous for all the wrong reasons. 82, yeah. The E.T. game is very famous in the games industry. Yeah.
You have the arcade game,
but you wouldn't have covered that because of course
E.T.,
you've seen E.T.
There was a board game from the Parker Brothers that was made. There was a card game as well from them for this game, like a kind of fantasy card game. There was a pinball machine that was designed, but actually took so long to build they never actually made it for the film, so it never got designed because it took too long to build. There was a donut tie-in, and the kind of the donuts they sell at like Dunkin' and stuff like that, the Krull that are kind of crinkly donuts. They called it the Kruller, and it was meant to be the Glaive donut that you can get and buy in places.
Oh wow,
that is so like early marketing, like fast food marketing as well.
I would have bought that 100%.
And the weirdest thing that they did, there was a frisbee.
Yes.
And the weirdest marketing for this film is they basically did a letter writing campaign where couples could write in an essay about the reasons they love this film or something, and they could come on set and whilst wearing costumes from the set get married. And this is a
what?
Brilliant.
This is a quote.
Brilliant, I love it.
This is a quote from the Moving Arts Film Journal. On a hot summer day in 1983, a dozen couples gathered on a soundstage in Burbank to take part in a group wedding. One after another, they walked past a pair of futuristic soldiers in fanciful army, down a red carpet flanked by strangers in folding chairs, and up to an altar made of faux stone. They had penned the winning statements described as the studio's press release statements. The penned statement was why their fantasy come true would be they would have a Krull wedding in Hollywood, and they took massive photos of them having this Krull wedding. It garnered basically zero press coverage for the film. It cost them tons to do. It was incredibly expensive and went nowhere. And as we alluded to, the box office for this film, it came out in July 29th, 1983. It was fourth at the box office, only making $5 million. It was behind National Lampoon's Vacation. Jaws 3D was in its second week, and Return of the Jedi was third place after 10 weeks at the box office. Sorry to correct myself. Even after 10 weeks, Jedi was still there and ahead of this film's release. It bombed spectacularly. It did a bomb. It's probably the biggest bomb we've covered, I'm guessing. But there is a reason. I love
that. It's like that's like 90% of PR stunts. That is like it just does nothing and no one cares.
Yeah, it does nothing, no one cares, and it costs a lot. And I think
I do. I say like my wedding day is one of the best days of my life, but honestly, it pales in comparison to even the thought of getting married next to people in costumes from Krull. It's just the knowledge that happened has just tarnished it for me now. So thanks, Liam.
No, you could have had. I'm sorry. Like we all planned these amazing days.
Look at what you could have won.
And I think it's why has this film persisted is something that I kept on thinking to myself as well. Like that we all have films from our childhood that we've seen a lot and kind of sit with you. I mentioned to a few friends that we were covering this film, and those who had seen it were really excited by it. Oh, yeah, Krull, yeah. And one of them even spoiled for me the death of the Cyclops. They were like, like, oh no, it's so heartbreaking. Like when the Cyclops dies and like all that. Like it's weird how there is definitely stuff from your childhood will sit with you and will maintain. And I do suggest maybe one of the reasons this may have been successful post cinema is the fact that if this film appears on TV, you can start watching it at any point of this film and it doesn't matter. Like, if it's on, you can catch it, you're fine.
I have no recollection of this being on TV as a kid. I remember Star Wars, Labyrinth, Dark Crystal, films like that. I have no recollection of this film. Or even Princess Bride I watched a lot as a kid, but this film I have zero recollection of it being on TV or anything. It was like a nothing film.
It's weird. Film that doesn't exist.
It's the moments though, isn't it?
I think this film is ripe for a remake though. And I haven't seen it, but take the aesthetic and the kind of the feel of the Green Knight and apply it to this. And I think you might have something, or even the oddness of Mandy, and throw that in there. And I think up the horror. And I don't know. I think have a really interesting, cool, quirky sci-fi medieval kind of film. I think it could be done, but yeah. Because they always remake good films.
I think that's a great shout. I mean, I think
you would have to do a lot of work to this, but I get it.
I'm prepared, Liam. I'm prepared.
So many of the iconic elements of the movie are done for you. It's just about strengthening the through line. I think it's about reinforcing the hero's journey.
It's the
which again is just strengthening the through line again.
It's hero's of journey and the love story has to be the two things you tackle first.
Sure,
both of those things have to work, and they barely exist in this.
But then it's already set up to be a star-crossed lovers thing. They just didn't do it. It's set up to be a hero's journey. They just didn't do it.
Yeah.
It's set up to be a road movie for a MacGuffin in the glaive. They just didn't do it.
Yeah.
It's set up to be a redemption story for the Cyclops, but they just didn't do it. It's set up to be a buddy movie between Ergo and the kid Sia, but they just spoilers. They didn't do it.
Been more fun if a lot of the elements they met along the way were puppets. If
Jim Henson's Krull, yes. I'm
if
totally.
Ergo
I'm
was
100%
a giant
in.
vulture magician, that'd be great. That would be much more fun.
Between the three of us, I think we can nail this. I'll bring the visuals, you two do the writing. We've got it sorted.
We're totally. I'm genuinely I totally agree. I think you could absolutely remake this, and I think you could really do the core ideas of it justice, the things that obviously really do resonate with people.
Yeah.
And again, it's one of those things, because it's persisted as a cult classic, it's a thing that if you brought it back now, there would be so many people who are oh shit, yeah, Krull, I remember, it's so sad when the Cyclops dies. Even though they don't really remember anything else about it or watching it, they just remember those moments there.
You get that a lot.
Exactly,
I mean, the
they
bloody,
just
Ready Player One. It's the glaive definitely is more iconic than the actual film.
Absolutely, but then I think, in my opinion, that's what makes it perfect for a remake.
You're right, yeah.
Because it has this iconic moments, this iconic imagery, but it just doesn't really work in the way that you would want it to, in my opinion. Can I be really boring about my job for a minute? Because you said something that really reminded me. Talking about doing the scrappy underdog studio making the mega hit off the back of things that they're super passionate about, that they want to bring to the big screen, and it turns into this mega hit because of that. And importantly, alongside being a mega hit, it sells a ton of toys to children and makes infinity bazillion pounds off that. The big studio comes in and goes, we want to make a bazillion pounds off toys.
We want that.
Who can we hire to make this fantasy thing? And it's such because I got into the job I do now in video games. I got into through things about MMOs and online games and stuff. And it's almost and working in that kind of genre quite a lot. The one through line of so many stories of failure within that. And these are projects that cost hundreds of millions and will never ever recoup the money, these kind of failures. And they were all chasing that exact same thing of, if we could just make 10% of what they did, it'd be a huge success. So then they put people on it who are interested, are competent, but they're not passionate. They're not trying to create. They're not trying to create their magnum opus as like, and so many people do that and fail, right? But then you get like the odd people who just, the stars align. Everything is in the exact perfect position to make it possible. And then someone just reaches out and grabs it, right?
Yeah.
And just completely changes like how a medium operates, or almost overnight, like in the blink of an eye. And then you get the people who kind of come on afterwards and go, oh, if we could just make 10% of that. And there's so many examples of it. And it's not just Star Wars, right? Like, this is such a, like, well-treaded thing. Like, you think when Lord of the Rings was a big success, like, all the fantasy stuff came out when Harry Potter was a big success. All the wizard stories came out when Marvel was a success. And it's happened before, Westerns, pirate movies, I don't know, like
film noirs and everything.
Probably
that's why we wanted
like
to do this in the 80s, because it is a product of 80s filmmaking. Is the fact that Star Wars existed and it changed what people tried to make as films. Like it changed everything, and this is the immediate fallout. This 5 years later, whatever. This is the immediate fallout of them just being like, well, we need to do one of those things, one of those big space things. So space operas, those Star Warsy. We'll do a Star Wars, and then we'll just make loads of money on it. And it's
my grandkid, he loves the Star War. Won't shut up about the Star War.
And like Peter Yates is a competent director. He really is. Like there's like you said it in what you were saying, and I mean Peter Yates got nominated for Best Picture this year and Best Director this year for The Dresser, the same year this came out. It's not like he was just like a cheap person they hired. He was a competent director, but he's not the director to do this thing. He's not passionate about it. I read the quote at the beginning when he's just like, oh, it seemed fun. He didn't have to read anything. I just used my imagination. Like he wasn't the right person to be doing this.
Bigger.
Thanks. Think different. Exactly. Like there's different people, and I think you see that so often when you get these. I don't like to use the word copycat franchises, but what you're saying, the kind of derivativesness is quite often you get given the directors take over them who aren't quite the right person to be doing it, and they're not given quite enough free rein to actually do anything, and they're also not quite interested enough to actually be able to do anything kind of special, and you end up just with the kind of Hollywood machine running. And I think Krull, in the end of the day, to me represents the 80s Hollywood machine running, really, and producing what they think the 80s needs. And it'd be quite interesting. Again,
cultural context of the time. Another callback to one of the first things I said. You got to think about it in terms of like the environment that it was made in, what people wanted from it, what people expected from it. All of that stuff is so important to just understanding, the things that this movie got right, the places where it went wrong. And I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. It's what we like to do, to be honest. So yeah.
And also thrown weapons are just OP throughout this whole movie. Someone attached to this movie was just really into the idea of like
throwing spear
weapons. Throwing a spear, throwing a glaive, throwing axes at one point that then like hit each other in midair.
Yeah. That was weird.
Which is an incredible display of martial prowess that is never repeated by that group.
Don't the axes land in between the puppy or the pig? He turns into a pig, doesn't he?
They go over Ergo and then he turns himself into a pig. I feel like the idea for that was they throw the axes at him and then he turns himself into a pig. And that shrinks him down, which is why the axes miss him. I think that was probably the original idea. Well, no, but then the way it's filmed, they hit above him, and then he turns into a pig, because that's a lot easier to film.
Into pigs, doesn't he? Obviously, he doesn't turn them into pigs.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, because the joke is
but I mean, you got to think like
he's always trying
in the
to change
remake
other people into animals, but he's got the spell backwards, and we never get him to learn that. So I don't know.
But then at the end, it turns out that shouldn't have been what he was doing all the time. He was trying to turn other people into things because he was a coward and he didn't want to get involved. But then at the end, he was like, I can turn myself into shit. I'm going to turn myself into a drugged tiger and roam around these corridors with these people wearing suits that they can't see out of, and a small child, obviously.
When the tiger's basically like just kind of leisurely walking around the corridor, kind of yawning.
You know what? The more I talk about this, this is actually an area where I think we're doing a disservice to the film by saying the lack of through line, the lack of character development. I think actually Ergo does have a character arc.
Fair
He
enough.
does.
Yeah.
Unlike anyone else in the film, like, you know, he's obviously like a comic relief character, but he does go from being, you know, the clue is in the name almost. He goes from being very like egocentric and, you know, self-centered and cowardly, self-serving. Even at the very beginning, he doesn't mean to go along with them.
He tries to run away.
It's just because he's scared. He's scared of the Cyclops in the trees, so he just goes the direction that they're going, you know? But then, anyway, and then he does the puppy thing for the kid, and that's nice, and then he realizes that actually, like, at the end, he's like, he realizes that, okay, he can turn himself in. You know what I mean? Like, that's another thing. There's, like, it's there, it exists. It exists. And in the remake...
really show on screen. When did the tiger get hurt, by the way, as well? I remember
it gets shot in the paw, but I think there's just no impact effect.
I love it when the hero guy, Mr. Krull, is running around and he sees Ergo as
that's
the tiger
Prince Krull
dead,
to you, peasant.
but you don't see him
Krull.
see it. It's completely off screen. It's so just, do you know? It's just like he's running around trying to escape, and then when the film ends, it ends on a freeze frame, fucking freeze frame. As soon as they're just walking off into the distance, it just ends. And it's like, that's it. Okay. All right. That's it.
They do a classic, they have a laugh. They laugh about, only the king could release my shackles. And then it kind of ends.
Yeah. He like basically gives him some kind of position. It's like, for all we know, you're the only people in the world.
I think they are. They never mention the city of whatever they have to go to. They never mention anywhere like that, like, or the people. They never mention any kind of wider thing than you see.
Exactly. Seer guy's dead. Spider lady's dead. Everyone in the castle's dead.
I think
the prison's empty because all the prisoners escaped.
From Dragon Ball Z, basically. It's just got a tiny castle on it. That's it.
Yeah, about like 1,000 leagues is like 100 meters or something. Fire mares.
Fire mares. They just look quick, but it's actually they don't travel very far at all.
All I can think about now is like how you could totally remake this movie and make it actually good. But no one will ever do that, because if it was remade now, it'd just be, again, remade as a cynical cash grab as cheaply as possible. You know,
I wouldn't even say as cheaply as possible. They would just throw way too much money at it, but not enough thought.
Yeah, and it'd still just be like totally lacking in any kind of like emotional like core or like real kind of resonance in it.
I'll be like Todd Phillips will take it over and make it some dark and creepy thing about society. Be like the dark, gritty reboot that shines
it's
a mirror
about
up to
society, man. Yeah, it's like reset in the modern day.
It's gritty Krull. It's not your daddy's Krull.
The gritty reboot of Krull. Definitely, sign me up.
So have we got any final thoughts then? Like,
I think the fact that like my brain is just going so much to like, if you remade this movie, like how would you draw out the aspects of this movie that are good and make it into one sort of satisfying thing? And I think that says so much about my feelings of the movie that I feel like it was close. Like it could have been something amazing. And I think that's why it still just like resonates with people, especially people who like saw it as a kid and kind of half remember it, because you remember those moments that really worked, and it just needed someone to love it, you know?
Yeah, sure. I think that's right. It could have been a Willow, which is a film I don't particularly like, but like it's definitely more successful at what it does.
Which Willow's more successful?
I think Willow's more successful in this, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. But like I mean, for me, this should be a film that I should love, because it combines so many elements that I adore. Like it's got stop motion and it's got prosthetics. It's got, you know, great production design. You know, the cinematography, as I said, was by Peter. I can't pronounce his name. Suschekis. I don't know. He did Empire Strikes Back. You know, you've got a great James Horner score, which he actually used again in like Rocketeer in Aliens. If you watch those films, you can actually like hear those in there again.
Yeah, we didn't mention James Horner. Yeah, Titanic and.
But like Paul said, it's lacking in any characterization and just any kind of. The characters are very uninteresting. Apart from Ergo, they're just pretty boring and just I don't know. You just don't really give a shit when they die. You're like, oh, okay, he's dead now. All right, great. Next. It's just I don't know.
Yeah. It
promised so much and delivered very little. That's all I can say, really.
For me, it's just one. It's just like it feels like a film that they didn't appreciate how hard it is to do one of these films.
Yeah.
Like it felt like, it's easy, but you just plug and play all this stuff in. And I think the very fact they dubbed the actress with an American actress just to be like, well, it will sell better in America if she's American is just speaks to what they were thinking about most of the time when making the film, really. And I think the fact that it was even a decision.
That's why they wouldn't have cast Liam Neeson's the lead, because they probably wanted an American to lead the film, even though everybody surrounding him is British.
Yeah. And they're shooting it in London, they're shooting it in Pinewood, they're shooting in Italy, yeah. That's what they're going for, and everyone else in the film is just these English stage and TV actors who are quite recognisable, to be honest. But yeah, it's a weird one. But is it fun to watch? Did I have a good time? I think it's okay. It's a little long. There's definitely a bit in my notes when I was like, it's been half an hour and I don't think anything's happened, is what I wrote down in my notes. There was definitely a bit and
climbing
I was
that mountain.
Still climbing that mountain. We're just chatting here, are we? And the amount when they cut to Lissa in The Beast, I found it really funny because they gave you a minute and a half of footage of her. They'd show this half an hour footage of them climbing through a valley, and then it would cut to her in the Beast's mountain for about a minute and a half of her and him just going, I want you, and then it'll quickly cut away again. And it just made me think of how little footage they had to balance the two stories. They just didn't have anything to kind of spread around the film. They must have just shot a bunch of her in that fortress and that was it. Just drop a minute now and again to remind people that she's actually captured, but don't actually give her anything to do. And that annoyed me. That got on my nerves when I realised that was happening throughout the film. But it's
filmmaking. Got to remind the audience what's at stake. There's a woman.
Yeah. There's a woman.
She needs peril. Protecting. Oh, she's being shown a crown and a sparkly dress and a giant rose.
And she lives in an eyeball. That was a good part of it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Weird.
It's fun. I can understand why people enjoy it, I guess is my point. I can understand why people have a fun.
But the thing is, you could have just watched The Princess Bride, or you could have watched Flash Gordon, or even Willow, right?
Yeah, any of them.
There's so many things that kind of hit similar notes that just have so much more heart.
Beastmaster.
Beastmaster. That's an example for sure.
Conan.
Yeah, there's just so many of these things. I mean, for God's sake, in this day and age, we even have the bloody Lord of the Rings movies. If you want some fantasy, I mean, my God, I saw someone made one of them memes that they have now about it. Apparently, it's 20 years old or something.
Jeez.
And they did the thing of Gandalf saying to Bilbo, "You haven't aged a day," and it's true, right? You watch. You watch that Lord of the Rings movie now, and it is just it has that real timeless thing.
Yeah.
I mean, even the original Star Wars, the original Star Wars, you watch that, and it just has this. Even though there's elements of it where you can tell it's from the time that it's from,
sure.
it's still it just has such a timeless kind of vibe to it. Whereas, yeah.
Did you get that Lord of the Rings feel though from that shot though when they're running across that bridge that collapses at the end?
Very Balrogy, wasn't
Totally.
it? Yeah. Yeah,
and there's they use I think it's the Wilhelm scream, and that someone gets shot off the bridge. I have no idea who. It's just one of the bandits who we have. Who just exists. It's so far away, you can't tell who it is. But yeah, it's the Wilhelm scream off the bridge. Yeah, sure. And I mean, I'm sure that it's fantasy, isn't it? Of course, they would have been talking about Tolkien. They would have been talking about action set pieces, and they would have been drawing inspiration from a ton of different places.
I have a
You know,
question.
It's all about invading the castle and having to like escape the peril and all that. Like so much of that final sequence is just them running through the castle, like
through the different tunnels,
different scenarios. Exactly. Yeah.
I have a quick question to maybe wrap us up. What would the sequel to this have been if it had been successful?
Ooh.
Because obviously you have this prophecy of their son. That seems clear.
Yeah.
But you can't make the sequel to be like 20 years' time, here's the son grown up.
Why not? That's what they should have done with The Incredibles 2, and I'll fucking stand by that hot take. My entire life. I will never let go of that idea because it would have been a million times better. Anyway. Why can't they fast forward for the sequel? Like,
Hey, if you go on YouTube, there's a Krull 2 Lost in Sibia teaser trailer, concept trailer. So check that out.
Amazing. What would they say? Well, they've killed the beast, but who knows what other threats lurk
are out there? Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I mean, I guess it has to be linked to the prophecy, right? Like, it has to be linked to the prophecy. This idea of them getting together and having this son that's going to rule the galaxy. So I don't know, maybe maybe there's just people who just live on another planet and they're just like, we don't want your son to rule us. So it
also, they become like, villains. I like it.
It becomes like an invasion thing, so instead of them having to go to the place, they're like having to defend or like run away or something. And then you could introduce like an element of like rising threat, for example, as opposed to in this movie where the threat is like the threat peaks at 5 minutes and then just stays the same. Like in terms of the overall plot, like it has its little like, oh, Spider Lady, that guy's in trouble. Oh, the sea is, you know what I mean? But yeah, a sense of rising threat. That's what should be in the sequel.
If you type in Krull 2 in Google, it comes up with like a question: is there a sequel to Krull? And the answer is Krull was an interesting movie, but didn't really merit a sequel. One major problem that it had, both as a story in its own right and as a setup to any kind of franchise, is that it did an atrocious job at world building. We get almost no sense of this in any kind of a populated world. So there you go.
Hey, that's all the things we were saying.
I mean, that's fair. I usually, like, whenever I read anything that includes some kind of or in the first sentence, I just stop reading, like, immediately. And I feel like I've never missed out on anything worthwhile. That's just a tip for anyone who's listening.
Apparently Joe and Auntie Russo have talked about wanting to do a remake of Krull.
That's a good note to finish on.
Do you know what? I'm sure it'll happen. It'll definitely happen. Like, I mean, if you look at the absolute barrel scraping that's happening at the moment with what films are coming out, a fucking Cruella de Vil origin story. Like, Jesus fucking Christ! Like of all the films that don't have to exist. Like, my God.
That's the thing. Cherry was such a success that we don't stop talking about Cherry and being the great film Cherry by the Russo brothers. You know, the people who made the most successful film of all time. That great film Cherry they just released and we never stopped talking about. No, that was such a success.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Do you know what the most successful films at the moment are? Those like totally by the numbers like action movies that Netflix fucking churn out. Like they get one famous person, whether it's like Michael B. Jordan, Chris Hemsworth, fucking Charlize Theron, and then they just make like a super derivative, like mid-budget action movie that just goes straight to Netflix. That's what people want. Fill up the fucking trough. Don't try. Don't get creative or anything. Like just more of the same. Pilot content for the content god, blood for the blood throne. You know, all that shit.
I'm seeing on my notes here that default film number 10 got 2 billion watches on Netflix last week by their numbers. Like, it's the most successful thing ever.
by their numbers, to qualify, someone must have watched the first 4 seconds of the film to qualify as a viewer.
Anyway, I think we should wrap it there. I think that's a good point.
on that bombshell. Oh God, that's not a Top Gear reference, by the way. That's just a cliche I'm dropping.
It's a bombshell
in. I don't want anyone to be under the impression that I think Top Gear is good in any way.
Well, thanks again for joining us, Paul. It's always a delight. And thank you for working your way through Krull with us.
Thanks for having me. It's a lovely excuse to hang out and it's also in an environment where it's expected of me to just like go off on one for a bit, which is ideal. So thanks.
Next time I want you to I want to hear your cast for the Krull remake. That's what I want to hear.
Oh shit. Yeah, deal.
Awesome. So what are we talking about next week then, Liam?
Next week we're diving well into rock musicals, which is apparently a thing for a single year in the 80s. And we're looking at Streets of Fire.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. We've got two very special guests joining us from that. We've got Sean and Frank from the Film Junk podcast. So yeah, it's going to be awesome. It's one of the world's, well, it's in the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's longest running film podcast. So that's cool. Well, thanks very much for listening, and please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on whatever you listen to us on, be that Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. You can also reach out to us on Twitter. We are at AdjustYourTrack. That's with a YR, not a your. And remember, if the picture's bad, don't forget to adjust your tracking.